Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku took a desperate leap and became a villain? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. After the first recorded occurrence of supernatural powers in China, more and more cases sprang up one after another. Before the world knew it, the supernatural became normal. The world has become a superhuman society, and about 80% of the world's population now has some kind of special trait called quirks. But all men are not created equal. This was the harsh reality Izuku learned about society at the young age of 4. The small margin of 20% who were not endowed with special powers were often bullied or teased, ostracizing them from the rest. By the age of 4, a person's quirk was expected to manifest. But for Izuku, it never happened. All he ever wanted was to be a hero, saving everyone with a confident smile, like the world's greatest hero, All Might. The number one hero was who he looked up to the most and who he aspired to be like. But without a quirk, that was impossible. It would be better to give up, the doctor had told him. Upon hearing the news, Izuku shut himself in his room rewatching All Might's debut video. The words of the old video looped as he watched it over and over again. Can you see that? He's already saved 100 people, he terrified bystander said. The camera shook as someone held it aloft, trying to get a better shot of the disaster. That's crazy. It hasn't even been 10 minutes. It's insane. Rising above the wreckage was All Might, laughing confidently. His voice could be heard over the chaos and crackling flames, people in his arms and draped over his shoulders. It's fine now, he said loudly. But because I am here. It was a moment that once filled Izuku with exhilaration, but now all he felt was despair. As the rain droned outside and the video looped back to the beginning, his bedroom door opened with a slight creak. His mother peeked inside. But he could hardly see the images anymore as the tears streamed down his freckled cheeks. Mom, he muttered. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in. He's such a cool hero. He turned to look at his mother, pointing to the screen, the video still playing. Can I be a hero too? His mother threw her arms around him and hugged the boy tightly. I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I'm sorry, Izuku. Over and over she apologized. Though her intentions were good, trying to comfort her son, the words were like daggers. That's not what he wanted to hear. Even if he was quirkless, he wanted her to tell him that he could do it. He could do whatever he set his mind to. That was what mothers were supposed to do, support their children no matter what. But she had already given up. To make things worse, his childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo, teased him for being quirkless. He started to call him Deku, basically calling him good for nothing. Being blessed with a strong quirk and confident personality, Kaken was popular with their classmates. And soon the other boys started teasing him as well. Quirkless. Useless. Pathetic. Loser. He heard it all. But despite that heavy blow, Izuku tried to remain positive. When it was clear he would never have a quirk, he started researching heroes and quirks, taking notes on everything he learned. He studied hard, determined to attend UA High School just like his idol, All Might. Even if he was quirkless, he would give it his all. After all, you never know until you try. But no one believed in him. It wasn't until that day that he realized how futile his struggle was. The school year was nearly over, and their homeroom teacher had been reviewing everyone's surveys for the future, such as where they wanted to attend high school and their goals after graduation. When their teacher revealed that he and Bakugo both wanted to attend UA, the class erupted in laughter. Miradia? No way, one of his classmates shouted. You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He felt his chest tighten, standing up quickly in attempts to defend himself. They got rid of that rule. There's just no precedent for it. Bakugo slammed his fist on Izuku's desk, setting off a loud explosion. Midoriya fell backward from the recoil. Hey Deku! Izuku flinched at the fury in Kaken's voice. You're below the rejects. You're quirkless. How can you even stand in the same ring as me? No, wait Kaken. It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. Believe me. He averted his eyes. He was trembling as he talked back to his terrifying childhood friend. It's been my goal ever since I was little. And well, I won't know unless I try. What do you mean unless you try? Bakugo shouted, his temper flaring. Are you taking the test for fun? What the hell can you do? You're quirkless. Cut it out, Bakugo, the teacher said. But his voice sounded disinterested. If you're going to pick fights, do it after class. The other students snickered. When the bell chimed, everyone packed up their notebooks and started to file out in groups. Some were headed out to karaoke while others had club activities after school. Izuku was packing away his hero notebooks, eager to go home and record his notes from the incident before school that morning. The story was all over the top news sites. But someone snatched the notebook from his hand as he was about to put it in his large yellow backpack. We're not done talking yet, Deku, Kaken said, holding the notebook out of reach. Bakugo's friends came toward them. Katsuki, what's that? As Izuku reached for the notes, Bakugo yanked it out of reach, holding it up so the two boys could see it. One of the boys snickered as he read the title on the front. Hero Analysis for the Future? Seriously? The other shook his head, trying not to laugh. Midoriya? Izuku stood up quickly. What's wrong with that? Just give it back. He reached for it again, but Bakugo slammed his hands together, the notebook exploding into a smoky mess. His heart sank as Bakugo held the charred remains of the notebook in front of his face mockingly before tossing it out the window. That was mean. Bakugo stared down his nose at him. Most top first-string heroes have stories about them from their school days. I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this mediocre middle school. He smirked. I mean, I'm a perfectionist. So anyway, he clapped his hand on Izuku's shoulder. The black school blazer sizzled under Katsuki's palm as his quirk activated, smoke rising up from where he singed the uniform. Don't apply to you, nerd. The three shouldered past him, leaving Deku feeling humiliated and downtrodden. Come on, one of the boys said mockingly. You could at least say something back. Don't say that, the other chimed in. He's pathetic. He still can't face reality. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, Bakugo said, glancing over his shoulder. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a last chance dive off the roof. Teeth clenched, Izuku rounded on him. A jumble of hurt, anger, and desperation reflected in his green eyes. Bakugo raised his fist, his palms crackling with explosive power. But Izuku was frozen in place. What? He sneered. When it became clear Midoriya wouldn't retaliate, the boys left the classroom. The last one left, Izuku grabbed his backpack and trudged downstairs. He found his singed notebook floating in the fountain below the classroom window. Fishing out the sodden book, he slowly made his way home. Bakugo didn't know how to filter his words. He was suggesting he jump from the roof, commit suicide. And somewhere in the back of his mind, even if it was for just a moment, he had actually thought about it. What kind of hero talked like that, telling someone to kill themselves? His words were far from those of a hero. And as he walked home, Izuku's mind kept returning to those hurtful words. He wasn't even paying attention as he trudged through the pedestrian tunnel, heading back to their apartment. So when a sludge-like villain shot out from the sewer and attacked him, he was taken completely by surprise. The villain launched at him. It didn't take him long for the villain to overpower him, trying to force his disgusting, sludge-like form down his throat. Midoriya coughed, unable to breathe. The monster was speaking, telling him to calm down and let him take over his body. He couldn't breathe. His eyes started to water, distorting his vision. His head pounded. He tried to grab at the villain, but his body was fluid. He couldn't grasp anything. Thanks for your help, he said mockingly. You're my hero. Even if it came from a villain, somehow the word resonated. Everyone kept telling him it was impossible. He couldn't be a hero. But this stranger had said it, even if it was sarcastic. His struggling lessened, his strength slipping away. He gasped but couldn't get any air. Am I dying? He thought. As darkness closed in around his vision, a sudden gust of wind burst from the other side of the tunnel, knocking the sludge villain's grip free. Vaguely he heard someone speaking, but it was too late. He collapsed from lack of oxygen. When he awoke, his idol was standing over him. All Might. It was All Might. But in his excitement, Izuku wasn't listening. All Might was speaking, but he wasn't hearing him. The real thing, the #1 hero, was standing in front of him. He reached for his notebook for All Might to sign. But he was already turning to leave. Izuku's stomach dropped. He didn't want this encounter to end so quickly. He had so many questions. Without thinking, he reached out just as the hero kicked off the ground. Before he knew it, he was flying, clinging tightly to All Might's leg. When the hero realized what had happened, he landed on a nearby roof. But All Might acted as though he was a burden, not bothering to offer him a second glance. "Talk to the people downstairs and I'm sure they'll let you out," he said in his deep voice. "I seriously am out of time, so I really must go." "No. I will not wait." But he reached out for the hero again, but slowly pulled back. The words everyone had said to him over the years ringing through his mind. "You can't be a hero. It's impossible." But maybe, just maybe, if All Might said so, maybe there was still a chance for him. It was all he ever wanted, to be a hero just like his idol. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage, and shouted, "Even if I don't have a quirk, can I become a hero?" All Might hesitated, hearing his desperate plea. Izuku's legs trembled as he continued. "Can even someone without a quirk be like you? Without a quirk? It might have been because I don't have a quirk, but I'm always made fun of. Maybe that's why, I don't know, but I think saving people is super cool. I want to be like the greatest hero, like you." He didn't even glance back at him. "I cannot simply say you can become a hero even without powers." His last hope, the one beacon of light in this hopeless world, wavered. It felt like he was being swallowed up, the words like an endless sea of despair. "If you want to help others, then you could become a police officer. It's not a bad dream, to be a hero. But you also have to consider what's realistic, young man." All Might kicked off the roof and soared off once again, leaving Izuku standing alone on the rooftop. As the symbol of peace disappeared into the skyline, he felt his hopes and dreams fading with him. If All Might didn't think it was possible, no one believed in him. His classmates, his mother, his hero, not one. A swirling sense of hopelessness welled up within him and tears welled up in his eyes. Maybe they were right. Maybe he should give up. Give up on everything. The last day of school was just a formality, friends saying goodbye before the break, and teachers giving last-minute advice. But Izuku didn't hear any of it. Despair swirled inside of him. He felt hollow. What could he even do now? His last chance, the glimmer of hope, had vanished like someone blowing out a candle. All that was left was a wisp of smoke. Bakugo's incessant bullying didn't cease either. He teased and taunted, provoking him further. "You're still here?" he sneered. "I thought for sure you'd have taken a dive already. It's the fastest way to get your quirk." "Come on, Katsuki," his friend whispered. "My Abe, you shouldn't say that. What if he really does it?" "Nah." Bakugo smirked. "He's too much of a wimp to do it." But the words churned in his mind. Maybe Kaken was right. What else did he have to live for? If no one believed in him, then what was the point? When the bell chimed for lunch, he trudged listlessly toward the stairs. He climbed them in a daze, pushing open the door to the roof. He leaned against the chain-link fence, his fingers curling around the cold metal. He stared down at the courtyard below. There were students dotted around the yard, eating their lunches together, laughing. So carefree. They wouldn't even notice if he disappeared. No one would. Who would care about a quirkless, good-for-nothing loser? His was 3 stories above the ground. Was it high enough? Surely it was. He pulled his shoes off and set them neatly to the side before reaching up. He wasn't strong or muscular like Bakugo, but he could at least scale a fence. He climbed up over the high chain-link fence and stood at the ledge. The breeze felt cool on his freckled cheeks. His stomach felt queasy as he stood on the edge, staring at the ground far below him. He wasn't sure how long he had been standing there, holding onto the fence with one hand as he contemplated it, wondered what it would feel like. But suddenly someone was shouting. One of the girls was pointing up at him and a small group began to gather down below. He glimpsed a familiar face among the crowd, a boy with ash blonde hair. Kaken. The door to the roof banged open. His teacher stood in the doorway, the principal at his heels. Midoriya, he shouted. Get down from there. The principal stepped forward. Please, Midoriya, it's dangerous. Since when did they care what he did or what happened to him? They never stopped the others from bullying him. They never offered encouraging words or put an end to the teasing. They had witnessed it on many occasions, but had done nothing. Just climb over the fence and we can talk about, his teacher said, trying to sound reassuring. Okay? He dropped his gaze, staring down at the crowd gathering below. But it was the look in Kaken's eyes that made him hesitate. He could see the doubt reflected in his expression. He was wondering if he would really do it. He was shocked that he had even climbed over the fence. Maybe you should have thought more about what you said, Izuku thought bitterly. His vision distorted as tears welled up in his eyes. They streamed down his cheeks. Midoriya, the principal pleaded. Please come back. Don't do it. I'm sorry. He muttered. He let go of the fence and leaned forward, letting gravity to the rest. Screams erupted from below and as he plummeted toward the ground. The look of horror on Bakugo's face sent a chill through him. You win, Kaken. I'll give up on being a hero. Please leave a review and let me know what you think and if you'd want to read more. Chapter 2 coming soon, hopefully? It was supposed to be a joke. He never thought Deku would actually do it. He wasn't supposed to jump. But seeing him up on the roof, standing on the ledge, something inside Bakugo clicked. All his teasing, his harsh words, his jokes, had he pushed him to this? One of their classmates had spotted him first and started shouting. Soon a large crowd had gathered, staring up at the boy standing on the roof on the wrong side of the fence. The teachers were on their way up to try and stop him. One of them had already called the police. But when Deku started to fall, Bakugo's heart dropped. Most of the other students either looked away or covered their eyes, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Small explosions popped and crackled in his palms. If he shot up there, he might be able to catch him. He could prove he was meant to be in UA's hero course. But what if he didn't make it? The moment of hesitation was all it took, made him a second too slow. He dove forward but wasn't quick enough. He managed to catch Deku's head and shoulders, but he wasn't fast enough to stop the boy's momentum. Deku hit the pavement with a sickening smack. Blood splattered Bakugo. He heard the bones breaking when he hit. Deku's leg was bent at an unnatural angle, his right arm pinned beneath him. He hit so hard he couldn't even cry out in pain. The fall hadn't been enough to kill him, but it had broken him. He gasped for air, each breath sharp and ragged. Blood dripped from his mouth and rolled down his chin. Deku, what the hell were you? Deku's eyes moved slowly, looking up at Bakugo. The look of despair and anguish reflected in his green eyes sent a chill coursing through Bakugo. It was like he was blaming him, like his eyes were saying, "This is your fault? Back up, back up." One of the teachers rushed out, cutting through the crowd. Sensei. Bakugo was frantic. What the hell should I? The ambulance is on its way. The teacher knelt beside them. Deku's eyes were half closed. He was barely conscious, gasping for air. Thank goodness you caught him. If he had hit his head. But I didn't, he thought. He had moved too slow to actually save him. It didn't take long for the whir of sirens to reach their ears. The ambulance arrived and paramedics with a gurney leapt out of the back. The sea of horrified students and teachers parted to let them through, but Bakugo was still there cradling Deku's head. He was afraid of what would happen if he let go. It was only when the paramedics lifted the boy and strapped him to the gurney did Bakugo finally stand up. He watched listlessly as they wheeled him into the ambulance and drove off, sirens screeching. That's when the whispers began. Who was he again? The quirkless third year, I think. I heard he was trying to get into UA. Maybe the reality was just too much for him. Poor thing. Their words were an incessant buzzing in Bakugo's ears. A large hand on his shoulder made him jump. Bakugo, their teacher said quietly. Change into your PE uniform. You can't go walking around looking like that. He looked down at his clothes. He was covered in blood, Deku's blood. It was all over his hands. Why don't you go home, the teacher suggested. We will be calling your parents later to check on you. What about Deku? I have to go call his mother now. He's lucky you caught him. He might have died otherwise. Bakugo trudged to his locker to retrieve his PE uniform. His friends called out to him, but he wasn't listening, rushing into the bathroom. As he changed out of his bloody clothes, he stared at himself in the mirror. Thin streaks of red were splashed across his face. He turned the water on full blast and washed his hands furiously. Crimson water swirled down the drain. And even when his hands were clean, he kept scrubbing. Though they were no longer bloody, he felt dirty. He slammed his fist against the wall, cursing himself. If he had been faster, if only he hadn't hesitated. What kind of hero can't save someone from falling? Anger at himself bubbled up inside him. By the time he emerged from the bathroom, most of the students had gone home. After witnessing something horrific, the teachers had dismissed them, calling their parents and counselors to send to those who saw it all happen. He walked slowly up the stairs and slid the door open. Deku's yellow backpack was still sitting on his desk, untouched. Bakugo grabbed his own school bag and slung it over his shoulder. Approaching Deku's empty desk, he opened the big, gaudy backpack. Several notebooks were stuffed inside along with an untouched bento box. One of the notebooks was charred and torn. Reaching inside, he pulled it out. It was the same one he had burned the other day, the writing on the front reading hero analysis for the future number 13. He kept it after it was damaged to this extent? He flipped through the pages. Deku certainly was thorough with his notes. Doodled on one of the pages was a costume design, a rather gaudy one with tiny notes about how it was supposed to mimic All Might's look. But a big fat X had been scratched roughly over the face. Harsh words, in Deku's handwriting, were scrawled in red across the page. Worthless, idiot, die. He snapped the notebook shut and stuffed it back in the bag. He should at least take Deku's bag home. They couldn't leave it here. But he dreaded what Auntie would say. Deku's mom, would she blame him? When he arrived at the hospital a few hours later, Mrs. Midoriya was already there, begging the doctor to tell her what happened. His mother was there as well, trying to comfort the frantic woman. When his mom spotted him, Bakugo balked. "Katsuki," she shouted. "Where the hell have you been?" She hugged him tightly. "When your teacher called me and told me what happened, I was so worried." "Get off me," he grumbled. "I'm fine." Mrs. Midoriya was looking at him. Tears were pouring down her plump cheeks, her eyes red and puffy. He stiffened. What would she say? What had the teachers told her? She approached them slowly. "Oh, Katsuki, they told me what you did. You tried to save him?" She sniffled. If you hadn't been there to catch him, I don't know what I'd do. The doctors said if you had not caught him, he would have died." Guilt clawed at him. Saved him? If he hadn't spoken so harshly, bullied him, maybe he wouldn't have jumped. This was all his fault. He averted his gaze, lifting Deku's backpack. "I brought his stuff," he muttered. "Thank you." She took the yellow bag from him, hugging it tightly to her chest. "Mrs. Midoriya," one of the doctors said. "Yes?" She set the bag down in one of the waiting room chairs and hurried toward him. Bakugo's mother sat down, arms folded. Hands in his pockets, Bakugo leaned against the wall. He glanced up at Mrs. Midoriya, talking to the doctor as tears continued to roll down her cheeks. "He's been in surgery for hours," his mother said. "Huh. Izuku. They rushed him to surgery and he's been in there ever since," she said. "All we know is that there is a lot of internal bleed and several broken bones. From that height, if he had hit his head, he probably would have died instantly." He nodded absently, still watching Midoriya's mother. She nodded quickly. The doctor excused himself and headed back down the hall. "Mrs. Midoriya shuffled toward them and slumped in the chair. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders trembling as she cried. His mother rested her hand on the woman's hunched back, trying to comfort her. "My baby, my poor baby." "What did the doctor say?" "He's been transferred to the ICU," she managed through her sobs. "He's unconscious. The doctor said I can't see him until he stabilizes." "It'll be okay," his mother said. "He'll be all right. Thank you, Mitsuki." She choked on a sob. "My poor baby." Kaken. Deku's voice echoed behind him. Bakugo turned to see Midoriya chasing after him. The only thing was he was 5, not a third-year middle schooler. The young boy held out his hand, a concerned look on his face. He remembered this day. It was shortly after his quirk had manifested and Deku's hadn't. He had slipped off a log when they were playing with some friends and he had fallen into the water. This was when it started, the bullying. He had been aggravated by Deku's attitude, acting like he was better than him. What could he do without a quirk? He hated the way he looked at him. "Are you okay?" he asked. "It would have been bad if you hit your head." Smacking his hand away, Bakugo heard himself shout. "Get lost. I don't need your help." The scenery melted away and suddenly he was in their middle school classroom. Deku was standing in front of him, eyes downcast and shoulders slumped. He heard himself speak again. "If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a last chance dive off the roof." "That's not what I meant," he thought. "I didn't mean it." But for some reason he couldn't speak. Deku looked up at him, the same dead look in his eyes he had seen when he jumped, filled with hopelessness and despair. "You're right," he muttered. "I should just give up. I'm just a quirkless nerd, worse than useless." There was a loud scream and a flash. He found himself standing outside. Deku's bloody, mangled body lay motionless on the ground. The scene was drenched in crimson. His own hands were covered in blood. Bakugo's hands trembled, his heart hammering against his ribs. His breathing quickened. And though Deku's lips weren't moving, Bakugo heard his voice clearly. "You win, Kaken. This is what you wanted, right?" A scream erupted from him and Bakugo bolted upright. He was back in his dark bedroom, chest heaving. Sweat rolled down his neck. His tank top was drenched. He looked down at his hands. There was no blood. They were clean, yet he felt like they were still dirty. They trembled as he tried to catch his breath. "Fuck." He hunched over, covering his face with his hand. "You weren't supposed to do it, idiot." Please remember to leave a review, let me know what you think. And chapter 3 will be up when I get around to writing it, smiley face. Mrs. Midoriya slept at the hospital, unwilling to leave Izuku's side more than necessary. He had been moved to a ward room, which meant visitors were welcome to come and go. Due to the shock his body had endured and the sheer amount of medications they had pumped him with, he was unconscious for days afterward. He had suffered several broken ribs, a shattered hip, and his left femur had snapped in 2 places. His right arm, which had been crushed beneath his body, had undergone multiple surgeries, requiring metal plates and several pins to put back together. Bakugo's mother dragged him to the hospital to visit. He had been dreading this moment. He stared up at the massive building that loomed above him. As they made their way to the elevator, they ran into Midoriya's mother at the vending machine on the first floor. She bent down, retrieving the bottle of coffee from the slot. "Inko." Bakugo's mother waved to her. "Have you been sleeping here every night?" He could see the dark shadows under her eyes. Since she had been at Izuku's bedside the entire time, she hadn't been sleeping well. She smiled when she saw them. She hugged Mitsuki, tears welling in her eyes. "How is he?" Mitsuki asked. "Much better, actually." She smiled for the first time in days. "He woke up this morning. It was brief, but at least he's doing better." The knots in Bakugo's stomach tightened. He dreaded what Deku would say. He feared, more than anything, that he would confirm what he had been thinking, that he was the reason Deku had jumped. He had been reliving the worst things he had said to Deku over the years. And over in his nightmare he watched Deku jump, unable to save him. Inko took them upstairs and led them down the hall to Izuku's room. When she opened the door, Izuku was lying in the hospital bed, his eyes half open. He was still wearing a neck brace, plastic tubing hooked around his ears and under his nose, pumping oxygen into his nostrils. His right arm was bandaged from his shoulder down to the fingers. "Izuku." Mrs. Midoriya hurried to his bedside. She brushed his messy green hair away from his face, a relieved smile spreading across her features. She kissed his forehead. "I'm right here, sweetheart. Mom is here." His eyes were glassy, heavy medications still coursing through his body. "You have visitors, sweetie?" She gestured for them to come closer. Mitsuki approached the bed, but Katsuki lingered behind. Mrs. Bakugo and Katsuki have come to see you. Unable to turn his head, Deku's eyes roamed slowly toward them. They locked on Katsuki. Even through the fog in his eyes, Bakugo could see the misery reflected in them. There was a darkness behind the evergreens that he had never seen before. There was no light in them, only pain and despair. He blinked slowly, looking back to his mother. She offered him an encouraging smile, squeezing his left hand gently. "Are you in pain?" she asked. "Would you like me to get you anything?" He didn't respond. The silence interrupted by the steady puffs from the oxygen machine. After a few moments, Mrs. Midoriya straightened. "I'll be right back, okay? I need to talk to the doctor a moment." Izuku closed his eyes. As his mother started for the door, Mitsuki followed behind. Katsuki lingered, listening as their mothers talked in hushed voices outside the door. His mother was asking if Izuku had been acting strange before the accident. There was a pause before Auntie admitted he had been despondent the night before. "He didn't eat any dinner," she admitted. "He locked himself in his room and wouldn't come out? Did something happen at school? I'm not sure. He wouldn't talk to me." Mrs. Midoriya started to sob. "My God, what has happened to my little boy?" "Hey," Katsuki said hesitantly. "Hey, Deku?" He didn't respond. "Damn it, I know you can hear me." Izuku opened his eyes slowly. He glanced over at his childhood friend. Suddenly flustered, Bakugo raked his fingers through his spiky hair. Grumbling, he looked away. "They're all worried about you, so just, fuck. It felt weird talking to him like this. Just get better quick or else. Got it? Stop making Auntie cry." When he glanced up, the look in Deku's eyes made him shudder. "Why is it?" Izuku closed his eyes again. Bakugo stormed out of the room. He had never seen such a look of betrayal and hurt in Deku's eyes before. It sent sharp jolts of guilt through him. Whatever. He would just have to ask Deku when he was recovered enough to talk, to ask if it was his fault. After another few days, Izuku was able to respond properly. He wasn't talking much. Not even to his mother. Psychologists, doctors, no one could get him to answer the question they had all been desperate to know. Why had he jumped? Bakugo was hesitant to go back to the hospital after that. But the nightmares were getting worse. Almost every night he watched Deku jump from the rooftop, and each time the same accusatory look bore into him. Eventually he couldn't stand it anymore. He stormed into the hospital and slammed the button for the elevator. When he reached the right floor, he made his way down to the room, the nameplate beside the door reading, Midoriya. When he opened the door, he was a little surprised that Mrs. Midoriya wasn't sitting in her usual chair. Instead, Izuku's bed was tilted up in a reclining position, making it easier for him to sit up. He turned his head slowly. His eyes still had a slightly glassy look to them, the heavy pain medications helping to keep him comfortable. "Kaken." "Hey, Deku." He sighed, turning away from him. Bakugo stalked toward the bed, hands in his pockets. Izuku wouldn't look at him. Auntie had left some superhero comics and one of Izuku's favorite All Might action figures on the bedside table, hoping they would cheer him up. But nothing seemed to do the trick. "Deku." There was a long silence. "What?" he asked, not bothering to look at him. "Why'd you do it?" Izuku swallowed hard. Bakugo could see his eyes watering as he stared out the window. He refused to look at him. Slowly the tears started to spill down his freckled cheeks. "What's the point?" Izuku muttered. "I'm useless, I couldn't even die, right?" "Hey!" Bakugo snatched him by the front of his hospital gown. "What the hell are you saying? Why the hell did you do it, huh?" "Auntie's been worried sick." Deku dropped his gaze. "I just wanted to erase the pain. So you thought you'd just go and kill yourself? Take the easy way? What about your mom, huh? Did ya think about what that would do to her if you died? Why do you care? It was your idea." Bakugo froze. It was like someone had punched him hard in the gut. Did his words really have that much of an impact? He let go of Izuku. Deku looked away, staring vacantly out the window. "You should be careful what you say, you never know what it could do to someone," he muttered, bitterness lingering in his words. Turning on his heel, Bakugo stormed out of the room. He couldn't face him. It was all his fault. Auntie called him a hero for trying to save Deku, but he had been the one that pushed him to the edge. He was no hero. A psychologist came nearly every day to assess him and had diagnosed him as clinically depressed. And due to his attempted suicide, he was placed under close surveillance. They kept him away from any sharp objects or medications to prevent him from attempting it again. As he started to heal, the nurses would often lift Midoriya into a wheelchair and wheel him around the halls, hoping to lift his spirits. Sometimes they would take him to the garden behind the hospital, but oftentimes, Izuku asked to be taken to the roof. Unable to stand on his own, they knew he wouldn't be able to try and jump. Whenever they did take him to the rooftop, he liked to sit in silence, just staring vacantly at nothing. As the days dragged on, he sank deeper and deeper into depression. And it was one of those quiet afternoons when a stranger approached him. Izuku sat in his wheelchair staring listlessly out the window. He heard the door open and footsteps approaching but didn't bother to look, assuming it was the nurse coming to fetch him. "You must be Midoriya-kun," a strange male voice said. He looked up at the stranger standing beside him. He had silvery gray hair and round glasses. When he smiled, Izuku could see the gap in his teeth. "The name's Jiren." He extended his hand. Izuku blinked slowly and turned away. Jiren laughed and pulled his hands back. "I get it. Don't want to trust a guy you just met, huh? What do you want?" "I think I might be able to help you, kid." Izuku didn't reply. He turned away from Jiren, thinking he was another psychologist or some eccentric doctor trying to counsel him again. "You wanted to be a hero, right? Go to you?" He stiffened. "What would you say if I told you I could make that happen?" "That's impossible," he said bitterly. "I'm quirkless. Someone like me could never be a hero. My employer don't think so. He's been watching you and he thinks you got a lot of potential. I could set up a meeting. Take you to him if you want." Izuku looked him up and down. He didn't look like any doctor or therapist he had ever seen before. With the gold chain around his neck and gaudy-looking suit, he seemed more like someone who belonged in the Yakuza. But his offer tugged at the embers of his dying dreams. More than anything in the world, he wanted to be like All Might. It was all he ever wanted. Jiren extended his hand. "So, kid, what'd you say?" He thought it over a moment before he finally answered. "When can I meet him?" Jiren smirked, making the gap in his teeth more prominent. "We can go right now." A dark, swirling vortex opened up in the corner of the room. It was just out of sight of the security camera. Jiren pushed Izuku's wheelchair through the portal. A rush of cold wind surrounded him, and he suddenly found himself in a darkly lit room. It looked like an old, run-down bar. A lanky young man with pale hair was sitting at the bar, the hood of his black sweatshirt drawn up over his head. Standing behind the bar was a stranger who appeared to be made of the same material the vortex had been. He wore a nice tux, making him seem out of place in the drab bar. His eyes gleamed yellow in the darkness that made up his body. "Midoriya, am I right?" the strange man said, despite not having a mouth. "My name is Kurojiri. It's a pleasure to meet you." "How did I get here?" Izuku asked, confused. "My quirk," Kurojiri explained. "It's called Warp Gate and it allows me to create portals to transport people short distances." "Hey," the young man at the bar grumbled. "We don't need anyone else. We're doing just fine as we are." "As pleasant as always," Jiren muttered, pulling a box of cigarettes out of his pocket. "Don't be rude, Tamura," a deep voice came from the crackling television in the corner. There was no picture, only black and white static. "I believe young Midoriya could be of great use." "What do you mean, I'm useless?" Izuku said, his eyes downcast. "I'm quirkless. Just because you don't have a quirk doesn't mean you are useless. True, it gives you an edge, but there are many other strengths that don't require quirks. An associate of ours has a child who was in your class in middle school," Kurojiri said. "His boy said you had quite the analytical mind. You placed third in your class during final exams, didn't you?" "Have you been stalking me?" "Why the hell would we stalk a snot-nosed brat?" Tamura shouted. He finally turned around and Izuku could see the scars on his face. His eyes were dull but wild. Tamura faced the television. "We don't need this kid, Sensei. I can do it on my own." "Tamura," the voice from the TV said, a warning in his tone. We need allies to join our cause. Allies? 'Cause are you villains? The realization struck him like lightning. He had gone with some shady stranger and he had been abducted to a villain's base. He started to panic. What do you want with me? Villains are evil, I'm not evil. Villains and heroes are just words. It's all based on perspective, Sensei said. Compared to the righteous greed of the heroes, the villains of the world seem much more admirable, don't you think? What are you talking about? Who decides what is right and what is wrong? Those who stand at the top get to decide what is evil. The strongest establish what is righteous. But you know people who want to be heroes, don't you? Classmates, perhaps? Izuku's face darkened, his eyes clouding over as his mind drifted to Kaken. He and Kaken had always dreamed of being great heroes like All Might ever since they were children. But Kaken was far above him, so much closer to the summit than he could ever be. And his demeanor was not like a hero. Someone comes to mind? Kurogyari asked, sensing the tension swirling around the boy. Kaken, he muttered. And what is this Kaken like? The voice from the TV persisted. He's strong and aggressive, he's foul-tempered and mean. And does that sound like a hero to you? Izuku dropped his gaze. No. We are the rejects of society, Kurogyari said. The unwanted, people with quirks who are dangerous, people born into unfortunate circumstances. We all have our reasons to be here, but what brings us together is the fact that the world has turned its back on us. Heroes? Tamura grumbled. Those hypocrites don't deserve the praise they get. But Izuku was still a little reluctant to let go of his image of heroes. They save people. They don't save everyone. Where were the heroes when you needed them? The voice from the TV asked. He remembered the words All Might, his idol, had said to him, I cannot simply say you can become a hero even without power. He had practically told him to give up. It was because he didn't have power. That was what he needed. Power. And on that same day, the Sludge villain had called him a hero. Even though it had been sarcastically implied, it actually made him, dare he say it, happy. And the more he thought about it, the more the bodiless voice's words made sense. Most of the heroes were in it for the glory and the money. It was rare to find a true hero who did it for the sake of others. But these men were working for those who were outcast and downtrodden. However, there were still questions that needed answers. But why do you need me? For your brilliant mind, the voice from the TV said. I have heard from our colleague's son that your analytical mind rivals even the best. That is a very valuable asset. Jiren-san said you could help me He glanced around hesitantly. Get into you? Yes, of course, the deep voice said. Kurogyari reached under the bar top and pulled out a small wooden box as the unseen voice continued to speak. I have been doing some experiments. And I have come up with a very special serum that can enhance a person's natural healing abilities as well as amplify strength. At a higher dosage, it is quite dangerous, but I believe you will be able to handle this much. With some training and a few doses, you could easily gain enough power to pass UA's entrance exam. I don't want to hurt anyone, Izuku said firmly. All we ask is that you provide us with information when necessary, Kurogyari assured him. The Vortex man undid the latch and lifted the lid of the box. A few small vials filled with a strange liquid and a syringe were packed neatly inside. Izuku bit his lip as he considered their offer. I'll be a hero? To the outcasts everywhere, Kurogyari answered. So, Kit? Jiren took a long draft on his cigarette. A stream of foul-smelling smoke spiraled from his mouth as he exhaled. What do you say? He looked up at them, a small glimmer of light returning to his dull eyes. When do I start? Please remember to leave a review, let me know what you think. If it can get in the groove like I did before, I will hopefully have a regular upload schedule. Until then, Chapter 4 is coming soon. The hospital was in an uproar when Izuku returned through Kurogyari's warp gate. They had strategically transported him back to a quiet corner, nestled in the surveillance camera's blind spots. The villains had left him with detailed instructions. Someone would be along to administer the serum in small doses, changing his anatomy subtly and slowly. When one of the nurses spotted him, she shouted for the doctor. I found him, she hollered. He's here. A doctor and 2 nurses came rushing around the corner. To have a patient who was under close watch due to their suicidal tendencies go missing constituted an emergency. It had sparked a hospital-wide search. They didn't know how he could have disappeared without being seen, but they feared he might try to kill himself again with no one looking. Izuku's mother came running around the corner, practically at the doctor's heels. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Izuku! When she reached him, his knees gave out and she sank to the floor, hugging him. Oh my God, Izuku, where have you been? I was so scared. No one could find you and I thought. She choked on a sob, too afraid to put voice to what she thought he had done. I'm okay, Mom, he muttered. Don't do that to me. Her voice was frantic. My heart can't take it, if I ever lost you. She shook her head, not wanting to think about it. I'm sorry. He dropped his gaze. I won't do it again. She looked up at him. Say it clearly. I want to hear it directly. I won't try to kill myself again. I promise. His mother pulled him into a tight embrace, kissing his freckled cheeks over and over. Please don't ever do that again. I won't. The nurse who found him wheeled him off, back to his ward room. Though he looked fine on the outside, they had to be sure he hadn't done something like ingesting the wrong medications. His mother walked alongside him. Hey, Mom. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think it's too late to send in an application to UA? His mother hesitated. Though she was glad he was talking about his dreams again, she feared what his mental state would be like if he was rejected. Or if he was accepted, what would become of him? She forced a smile. Of course there's still time. I can get started on the paperwork while you're healing. Do you want to apply to the General Studies course? No. The Hero Program. Nodding absently, she gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Okay, honey. Whatever you want. Once the vortex had closed, Tamura turned to look at the television. It was all static, but he knew Sensei was watching. He had never seen his teacher so interested in someone else before. And he had offered his help so freely. Sensei, Tamura said slowly. You're not going to turn that brat into one of those, are you? No. We need him, the voice beyond the TV replied. A mind like his would be a terrible thing to waste. To have the boy come to us willingly, that was the best outcome we could have hoped for. The drug might warp his mind a little, but I can't go making him brainless. It's too valuable. What's so special about him? You have more in common with him than you think, Tamura. He could be a great friend for you. Tamura turned his back on the TV. We'll see about that. It was late, nearly midnight, when there was a knock on his door. He glanced over as the door slid open. The doctor stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Izuku didn't recognize him. He wasn't one of the usual doctors. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a syringe. Hello, Midoriya-kun, the doctor said. It's time. For your medication? He realized this must be the villain's contact within the hospital. They had said someone would come to deliver the serum. It must be him. Moonlight glinted off the edge of the needle. Izuku eased back against the pillow and held out his left arm, rolling up the sleeve. You seem ready, the doctor said, lifting the boy's arm. I'll do anything if it means I can be a hero to someone. It doesn't matter who. I must warn you, this will be very painful. What? I hear it's rather excruciating. I survived a fall from a 3-story building, he said bitterly. I can handle it. The doctor slid the needle into the vein in Izuku's forearm and pushed down on the plunger. As the serum began to take hold, it felt like liquid fire was coursing through his entire body. Sudden pain exploded through every fiber of his being. It stole the breath from his lungs, consuming him. It felt like his body was being ripped apart from the inside, fire burning every bone and muscle. He clutched at the hospital gown as if he were suffocating, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of agony. He could barely catch his breath. But as the torment intensified, he focused his mind on his desires. Power. If he was to get into UA and be anything like All Might, he needed power. And if this was the price he would have to pay, then so be it. The suffering would be worth it. VVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVVV touches onto UA's expansive campus. The architecture was grand with tall Corinthian columns and busts of famous heroes lining the walkways. There were large signs directing applicants to the exam location. High school hopefuls were pouring in by the hundreds, but only a handful would pass. The enormous building loomed above him as he made his way up the stairs. There were 3 tall doors, each with a number written in gold on them. In the application, they hadn't specified what was needed for the exam, so he had brought his school bag with pens and paper as well as a change of clothes. Usually the practical exam for the hero course required some kind of physical test. And though the details changed each year, he made sure he came prepared. He had been preparing for months, ever since the last day of middle school. He had trained hard and was determined to pass. The air was brisk, the spring still clinging to winter's chill. But the last thing he expected to see was Deku, walking the same path up to the exam room. He was still carrying around that stupid yellow backpack. He hadn't seen the nerd since he had confronted him that day in the hospital. Auntie had called and told them Deku had been discharged a few months ago, but he was surprised he was here, applying to UA. Auntie hadn't said anything about it to them. As he approached, Deku glanced over his shoulder. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" The green-haired boy smirked. "Morning, Kakin." That smile, it wasn't the one he used to wear. It felt different. How could he smile like that after everything that happened the past few months? Didn't he still blame him for the accident? He shook his head. He couldn't let those thoughts distract him. He had to focus on the exam. "Out of my way." He shouldered past Izuku. He didn't shout back or resist. He was the same as always. "Sure," he said, his voice sounding a bit hollow. "Don't let it bother you," he thought. "You can deal with it after the exam." But despite his best efforts, his mind kept drifting back to Deku as he took the written exam. What was he doing here? Was he applying for one of the different tracks in UA's program? Did he still blame him for what happened that day? Though his focus was distracted, Bakugo managed to finish the exam with time to spare. And thanks to his studying, he passed. But when he, along with the others who had cleared the test, were ushered into the large orientation auditorium, he was shocked to see Deku sitting there. Of course he passed the written exam, he was a nerd after all. But this was orientation for the hero course. What the hell was he doing here? "You applied for the hero course?" he asked, sitting beside him. Since their applications had been submitted at the same time, their seats corresponded, placing them beside each other. "Yeah. You never know until you try, right? You sure you're up for that?" He looked Deku up and down. He didn't seem much different and there were no bandages or casts. Maybe he was fully healed, but normally you wouldn't do something as strenuous as a hero exam only a few months after being discharged from the hospital. "Your mom's okay with you doing this? She helped me fill out the paperwork. Are you suddenly concerned about my health?" There was a subtle sting to his words. Though he didn't mention the accident, Bakugo knew that was what he was referring. "Shut up. I just didn't think they would let someone who was just in the hospital participate." Deku merely smiled, almost mockingly. Bakugo opened his mouth to retort, but the lights suddenly dimmed. One by one spotlights came on, illuminating a figure on the stage, standing in front of a large screen. The voice hero, present Mike, stood down below. Bakugo recognized his iconic blonde spiked hair and leather jacket. "For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my live show," he said in his loud voice. He didn't need a microphone to amplify his voice across the auditorium. His quirk allowed him to project even to the farthest corners. "Everybody say hey." Dead silence followed. But he acted as if he hadn't even noticed. "White, a refined response," he said, quivering with excitement. "I'll quickly present to you a rundown on the practical exam. Are you ready?" "Yeah." He was annoyingly energetic, despite the complete silence he was receiving back from his audience. As it says in the application requirements, you listeners will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles after this. You can bring whatever you want with you. After the presentation, you'll head to the specified battle center, okay? The monitor behind him sprang to life, detailing the 7 different exam centers for the mock battles. Each student, upon entering the auditorium, had been given a slip of paper with their name on it. The exam ticket documented their name, age, school they applied from, and the course they were trying to enter. A soft rustling echoed throughout the hall as the examinees each glanced down at their papers, checking for their corresponding exam site. Okay, Present Mike shouted. In other words, they won't let you work with your friends, huh? Bakugo muttered. Izuku glanced at his card. He was examinee number 2234, assigned to Battle Center B, while Bakugo's was number 2233, in Battle Center A. You're right, Izuku said. Even though our examinee numbers are consecutive, we're assigned to different battle centers. That's too bad. I was looking forward to crushing you. Present Mike cleared his throat, more animations appearing on the screen behind him. 3 different types of faux villains are stationed at each battle center. You earn points for each of them based on their level of difficulty. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to earn points by immobilizing the faux villains. Of course, attacking other examinees and any other unheroic actions are prohibited. The 4th type of villain is worth 0 points. That guy's an obstacle, so to speak. There's one in every battle center, an obstacle that will go crazy in narrow spaces. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to defeat it either. I recommend that you listeners try to avoid it. The students throughout the hall started to mutter amongst themselves, discussing what the 4th villain would be like. That's all for me. Present Mic's voice boomed over the din of chatter. Finally, I'll give you listeners a present, our school motto. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. Go beyond. Plus ultra." Izuku's eyes seemed to glimmer at Present Mic's words. Overcoming life's misfortunes, huh? He muttered. Now, everyone, good luck suffering, Present Mike said. As the other examinees started to file out of the auditorium, Bakugo looked over at Deku. There was something different about the way he was acting. Bakugo couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was unsettling. Deku looked up at him, an excited grin on his face. Let's do our best, Kaken. And we'll see who's the real hero. Remember to leave a review and let me know what you think. I love reading them. Check back on Monday for Chapter 5. It really is quite remarkable, the doctor said, unwrapping the bandages around Izuku's right arm. His broken bones had healed miraculously well. It normally took at least 3 months for the body to naturally heal traumatic breaks like the ones he had, but they had mended in half the time. Izuku flexed his hand, clenching and uncurling his fist to test how it felt. There was no pain, only the dull throb of unused muscles regaining their function. All that was left behind was a large scar from his shoulder to his elbow. His speedy recovery had shocked the hospital staff. His mother, however, was beyond relieved that her boy was well enough to go home. Take it easy for a few weeks, the doctor said. The bones may be healed, but it will take some time for you to be back to normal. You will need to go through physical therapy to get the muscles back to what they were. Izuku nodded. Thank you so much, his mother said, shaking the doctor's hand. Take care on your way home now. Izuku was silent the entire car ride home. He leaned with his chin resting in his palm, gazing out the window. He knew his mother was still worried about him, despite his physical and mental turnaround. Outwardly he seemed more cheerful. But to her, Izuku's demeanor seemed somewhat forced. He wasn't as happy as he used to be, and he was worryingly quiet. He used to be quite the chatterbox, but now he was distant and silent. When they arrived home, she carried his comic books inside, Izuku following slowly behind her. His legs were still a little shaky on the stairs to their apartment, having not walked much in the last 2 months. Dinner will be ready in about an hour, okay? She said with a smile. Why don't you rest in your room for a little bit? Okay. He could hear his mother bustling about in the kitchen, pulling out the ingredients from the refrigerator. Opening the door to his bedroom, everything was dark inside. It was a little tidier than how he left it the day he had jumped from the roof. His mother must have cleaned while he was in the hospital. Posters of All Might were plastered across the walls, shelves of the hero's action figures set up neatly on his numerous shelves. Comic books lined the bookshelf alongside his school books. And piled high on his desk were the notebooks he had filled with notes on all the known heroes and quirks they possessed. The one on top was charred and a little worn for wear. It was the last one he had written in, the one Bakugo had ruined. Picking up the tattered notebook, he flipped through the pages. When he got to his hero costume design, he ripped the page out. Crumpling it up, he tossed the paper in the wastebasket. It looked too much like All Might, someone who had cast him aside, just like everyone else had. If he was going to appear like a hero, he didn't want to be clinging to the rose-colored glasses through which he had been seeing the world. It was clear that, just like everyone else, All Might hadn't believed in him either. Being cooped up in the hospital gave him lots of time to think. And his mind kept coming back to the same dark thoughts, that he had been cast aside. No one cared about a quirkless nobody. The only one who did was his mother. And even then she hadn't believed in his potential. But what he wanted most of all was to prove Kaken wrong. There was nothing he wanted more than for Kaken to admit he was wrong and apologize. All he had wanted was to be friends, on equal footing. But clearly Kaken had made his decision. He wasn't interested in making friends. He only wanted to be the best, and he would trample on anyone that stood in his way. Well, he could only imagine Kaken's face when he proved that he could be just as good, if not better, than him. Even without a quirk. He was not useless. There was a soft clinking on his window, pulling him out of his thoughts. Peering out the glass, he glimpsed a shadowy figure down below. Snapping the notebook shut, he placed it back on the top of the stack. "Mom?" he called, leaning out of his bedroom. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm going out for a little bit, okay?" She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a small towel. A look of concern was set in her kind face. She was still worried about him, even if she didn't admit it directly. "Are you sure? Dinner will be ready soon." He gave her a hug. "I won't do anything reckless. You know I don't break my promises." "I know, but I'm just going for a short walk around the neighborhood. I want to stretch my legs a little." "Okay," she said hesitantly. "I'll be back before dinner." He tugged on his red shoes and headed out the door. Despite the shakiness in his legs, he made his way to the bottom floor of the apartment complex. Hands in his pockets, he trudged around to the alley his window overlooked. Standing in the shadows, waiting for him, was the lanky, pale-haired young man from the bar. His black hood was pulled up over his head. Izuku could tell he was tall, even though he stood with a slight hunch. Kurogiri was with him. "Congratulations on being discharged," Kurogiri said. "Thanks to that serum I was out in half the time." He flexed his hand. "Cut the small talk. We didn't come here to get friendly," Tamura grumbled. "Sensei wants to see you." Kurogiri's warp gate appeared in the shadows. The two villains ducked through the portal, Izuku following close behind. Instead of the rundown bar, they were transported to a dark and shabby apartment. Glancing out the window, the shades half drawn, Izuku couldn't tell where he was. But from the looks of the streets down below, it was a fairly nice neighborhood. Bright lights glittered like stars in the night. It was not the place he would have guessed a villain would live. It was not the stereotypical lair or secret base. The apartment was sparsely furnished. It almost looked like no one even lived there. Kurogiri opened the door to the adjacent room. Soft mechanical puffs, as if someone were breathing through a machine, came from inside. Tamura entered first, Izuku following cautiously behind him. "Ah, Izuku. I've been wanting to meet with you for quite some time." He balked when he first saw the villain. His face was horribly marred. Starting from his upper lip, it was completely made up of scar tissue. He had no eyes, ears or nose, only vague indentations where they should be. Various tubes were protruding from his neck and jaw, presumably the source of the mechanical breathing sounds. On the table beside him was a black mechanical helmet. Apart from his ghastly appearance, he was dressed in a fine suit. He sat with his leg crossed, resting his cheek lazily on his knuckles. "No need to be so shocked, my boy." He gestured for him to come closer. "Congratulations on being discharged." "Thank you. I must admit, I am surprised at how quickly you recovered. I never anticipated the drug I gave you to have such a tremendous effect. Perhaps your anatomy is a little different due to your lack of a quirk." Izuku dropped his gaze. He hated being reminded of his quirklessness. It made his chest tighten. "No need to look so forlorn. Just because you are quirkless doesn't mean you are worthless. Besides, I might be able to find you a nice quirk of your own. Emmy? A quirk? The villain nodded. Indeed. But first, I must hear your answer. Will you join us? He glanced at Kurogyri and Tamura, who were watching him closely. What he wanted more than anything was to be accepted. He wanted to be useful. And he wanted Kaken to admit he had been wrong. Before, they had told him all they wanted was information, but he had to be sure. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. I want some answers first. Sensei nodded. I want to know what your end goals are. I neglected to ask before I accepted your offer. But I want to know. He glanced at Tamura and Kurogyri. And I want to know why. Why should we tell you? Tamura growled. Shigaraki, please, don't act like a child, Kurogyri said. If he wants to be one of us, he has a right to know. We want to revolutionize this stagnant society, Sensei said. I wanted to bring order to this chaotic world. In this world divided by those with quirks and those without, order is hard to maintain. The so-called peace All Might has created is just a farce, perpetuated with a mocking smile. How can people who seek fame, glory, and money truly be concerned with those who are lesser? We want to show the world the false face of heroes and establish true order. We were all hurt by society. They created our instability. Just as your friend, Kaken, pushed you to try and take your own life. We each have our own personal reasons, Kurogyri said. But we can all agree on the end goal. We hope you'll become part of that dream. No one takes me seriously anyway. So if you think I could be of some use? More than some, Sensei said, a grin spreading across his scarred lips. Very beneficial. I will join you, but I have a few conditions if I may. You've got some guts, Tamura growled dangerously. Let's hear them. I am a reasonable man. I will see what I can do, depending on what your conditions might be. Well, I will provide you with information as I promised. But I don't want to be involved in any fighting. I don't want to kill anyone. Sensei nodded slowly, considering his proposition. Information is enough. There are others to do the dirty work. I can work around such conditions. Second, I want you to promise that if I join you, nothing will happen to my mom. Promise me no one will hurt her. That might be a bit more problematic. He leaned forward. If you join us, you would be putting her at risk. I'll leave if I have to cut off communication. But I want your word that none of your villains will harm her. What a clever boy you are, covering your bases. Very well. I accept your conditions. Izuku sighed, relieved. Now then. Sensei eased back into his chair. We will contact you again soon, when I have found you a nice quirk. Rest assured it will be before the entrance exam. He nodded. Kurogyri, send young Izuku home, please. Kurogyri nodded, his warp gate appearing in the corner of the room. As Izuku stepped through the portal, he was transported back to his bedroom. The lamp was still off, the street lights from outside casting dark shadows across his floor. Izuku! His mother's voice drifted in from the kitchen. He could hear her footsteps approaching his bedroom. Is that you? I didn't hear you come in. Yeah, I just got back. Dinner is ready. Why don't you wash up and come out and eat? But I'll be right there. As he heard her footsteps fade, his mind drifted back to the upcoming exam. He would have to test his newfound strength before the exam rolled around. But he hoped that when it did, Kaken would be there to see it. He wanted to savor the look on his face when he realized the quirkless nerd got into Yua. He was not useless. Not anymore. It was only a week after he had been discharged from the hospital when the villains contacted him again. Sensei had found a quirk for him. He wasn't sure how they were supposed to give him a quirk or where they had found it. He sat alone in one of the empty rooms in Sensei's dark apartment. Kurogyri had warped him here from a dark alley near his house. Shigaraki was there as well, keeping an eye on their newest recruit. When the door finally opened and Sensei walked inside, Izuku sat up straighter. Are you ready, my boy? Sensei asked. Izuku swallowed past the lump in his throat. He nodded. His heart was pounding. Just what kind of quirk was it? Would it hurt when he transferred it to him? He jumped when Sensei placed his hand on Izuku's head. A strange tingling crept through his body, starting from his head all the way down to his toes. It was warm, but foreign. It filled him up with an overwhelming sense of elation, but a glimmer of fear swirled inside him. His hand suddenly felt like it was burning. He recoiled, Sensei lifting his hand. There was what appeared to be black flames swirling around Izuku's right hand. He stood up quickly, knocking over his chair. Izuku shook his arm, trying to put out the fire, but nothing worked. But slowly he realized it wasn't burning him. The man I took it from called it the sacred flame. I thought it would be fitting for a young man with such fire in his eyes. It will only burn what you desire and it won't go out until your target is consumed completely. He tried to steady his breathing. Slowly, as he regained his composure, the flames began to diminish. You said you took it from someone? That's my quirk. Sensei grinned. I can take and give quirks as I see fit. To have something as powerful as Sensei's quirk, Izuku was jealous. Who did you take it from? Look. He was quite reluctant to let it go. Seems he thought it was the manifestation of Amaterasu's sacred fire. But I don't think it quite suited him. Thank you, he muttered. He flexed his hand, the black flames going out entirely. He could feel the strange power coursing through him. It will take some time for you to learn to control it properly, but it should suit you nicely. He could already tell that this new quirk was powerful but also incredibly dangerous. He would have to be careful whenever he used it. He needed to find somewhere he could practice using it safely. After all, if he hoped to pass UA's entrance exam, he would have to make the most of his new power. He just hoped he would be able to control the raging fire now burning inside him. The battle center was as chaotic as he had expected. Dozens of hopefuls had been divided out and sent to separate locations. But Bakugo wasn't worried about the others. He would show them all what he was made of and wipe the floor with them. When they all rushed into the fake city, looking for their enemies, they hadn't known exactly what they were looking for. It wasn't until a giant robot came crashing through one of the buildings that they realized what they would be fighting. Bakugo grinned. As long as it wasn't human, he didn't have to hold back. Explosions shot from his palms as he mercilessly tore through the scores of robots. Die. He wished the battle could have lasted longer. 10 minutes wasn't nearly enough to let out all of his pent-up frustrations. It felt good to rip through the metal hides and destroy the robots without hesitation. There were very few in his group that could keep up with him, but soon even they fell behind. He didn't have time to think about anyone else. All he focused on was destroying as many fake villains as possible and passing the exam. By the time Present Mic's voice boomed over the battleground, calling that time was up, Bakugo had destroyed nearly half of the enemies all on his own. In order to properly proctor the exam and offer medical aid to those injured, the start times were staggered. Deku's in Battle Center B would probably be starting soon. He wondered how the quirkless nerd would fare. Knowing him, his legs would lock up and he would cry, unable to do anything. He would just have to wait until the results were mailed to find out how badly the nerd had failed. Chapter 6. It was the last thing he expected when he was called to the teacher's office. Deku had been called too, making him wonder just what it was about. He was still feeling elated after receiving his acceptance letter from UA. He had known from the beginning that he would pass. It was a no-brainer. But having to come to the office with Deku, a tinge of fear played at the corner of his mind. Were they here to talk about the day Deku had jumped from the roof? Had someone pointed their finger at him? He glanced at Deku, who showed no sign that he knew why they had been summoned either. I can't believe we have 2 students from our school matriculating into UA, the teacher said excitedly. Especially you, Midoriya. It's a miracle. A grin spread across Deku's face. Bakugo rounded on him. Deku had passed the exam? How the hell did he manage that? He couldn't tell by the boy's expression what he was thinking. And it pissed him off. The rest of their teacher's words fell on deaf ears. He said something about not embarrassing their school and looking forward to what they did in the future, but he didn't care. He wanted to know how the hell Deku had weaseled his way into the top hero academy in the country. Once they were dismissed, he dragged Deku around to the back of the school. Out of sight, he snatched the boy by the front of his uniform and slammed him against the wall. Deku didn't fight back. What dirty tricks did you use to get in, huh? He growled. The first student from his school to go to you. My plan has already been torn to fucking pieces. I told you to go somewhere else. Deku grabbed the wrist that held him roughly. The nerd's grip was stronger than he expected. But it was the look in Deku's green eyes that sent a chill through him. What's wrong, Kaken? He sneered. Are you upset things didn't go how you wanted them to? Confused how a quirkless loser was able to get in? You should see the look on your face. There was something dark in the way Deku smiled, different than he had ever seen. It's priceless. Don't put your feet on the desk. The shitty Four Eyes with a stick up his ass was shouting at him. Don't you think it's rude to the UA upperclassmen and the people who made that desk? The other students were sitting at their desks, talking amongst themselves. Everyone was eager to begin class in the hero course. They weren't paying much attention to him or the Four Eyes. Everyone was too excited. There were only a few seats empty, the rest of the class having already arrived. They were all seated alphabetically. One of the seats that remained empty was behind him. Whoever it was would just be a nobody, a side character like the four-eyed loser yelling at him. Nope. Bakugo shouted back. What junior high did you come from, you side character? I attended semi-private academy. My name is Tenya Ida. Semi? Bakugo scowled. So you're a damn elite, huh? Looks like I'll have fun crushing you. Crushing? That's cruel. Do you really aim to be a hero? They both looked up as the door opened. Bakugo couldn't hold back his annoyance when he saw who it was. The quirkless nerd, yellow backpack in tow, was standing in the doorway. It's you, Ida said, ignoring Bakugo and hurrying over to the loser. I'm sorry I didn't say it before, but I misjudged you. I had no idea you were hiding so much strength. It's fine, he said, the slightest hint of a smile playing at his lips. Ida-kun, right? I'm Midoriya. It's nice to officially meet you. He glanced over, catching Bakugo's gaze. A slight smile played at his lips. Bakugo scowled. It was like the damn nerd was taunting him. There was something up, something fishy with how he got admitted. There's no way it should be possible. And the way he was acting, it was completely unlike the Deku he knew. There was something darker lingering behind his eyes. As the nerd took his seat behind him, Bakugo could feel his eyes boring into him. It was bad enough that Deku had been admitted to UA, but he had been accepted into the hero program as well. It was like he was mocking him. He just hoped they would be pitted against each other in a mock battle and he would prove Deku didn't belong here. He would find out what trick he was using or force him to use whatever quirk he had been hiding. But one way or another he would find out the truth. He would make sure of that. He didn't have to wait long. On the second day of class, after lunch was hero basic training. As they all sat quietly in their seats, a deep and unmistakable voice came from the hallway. I am here, All Might shouted, throwing open the door. He wore a bright red costume with yellow gauntlets and a red cape. Though he was Japanese, his hero costumes and attacks always screamed America, almost as if he were paying tribute to the classic heroes from American comic books. They all sat up, fidgeting in their seats as they muttered excitedly. It's All Might. Wow, he really is a teacher, Kirishima said. That's a costume from the Silver Age, isn't it? Azui added. Ojiro nodded. It's a style so different, it's giving me goosebumps. All Might puffed out his chest, a wide grin set on his face. I teach hero basic training. So let's get right into it. This is what we'll do today, combat training. And to go with that, are these. He unloaded large metal briefcases with numbers on them, each corresponding to their student number. These are costumes made based on your quirk registrations and requests you sent in before school started. After you change, gather in ground beta. Yes, sir, they all said in unison. As they each took their cases and headed for the changing rooms, Izuku hesitantly approached All Might. After everything the villains had told him, he was having doubts. And being this close to his childhood idol, he couldn't help but want to know the truth, if All Might had meant what he said that day on the roof. All Might Sensei? HM? What is it, young man? I'm not sure if you remember me. But what you told me that day? To follow your dreams? Good to see you've done just that. He laughed. It felt like a jolt shot through Izuku. Did All Might not remember what he had said? No, I mean, that's not exactly what you said. Don't you remember? All Might looked at him, confused. We didn't meet at a fan event? He didn't remember. He had forgotten the harsh, dream-shattering words he had said. Izuku had been so insignificant that All Might hadn't even bothered to remember him. Izuku shook his head. Never mind, it's nothing. Well then, hurry along, young man. He slapped him on the back. Get changed and hurry back with the others. When they had all changed and gathered in ground beta, All Might was there waiting for them. He was still grinning. But to Izuku it felt like a false smile. The fake city was where they had conducted the entrance exam, all the damage having already been repaired. Everyone's costumes were cool and flashy, but Izuku had opted for a plain green jumpsuit. He didn't want to stand out too much, just blend into the background. For this class, you'll be split into villains and heroes and fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. Without basic training? Azui asked. This is a real battle to understand those basics. However, the key this time is that there are no robots you can just beat up. The class was suddenly abuzz with questions, overwhelming All Might. He was new to teaching and inexperienced at handling such a rowdy class. Calm down, he shouted. The situation is that the villains have hidden a nuclear weapon somewhere in their hideout. The heroes are trying to dispose of that. The heroes need to capture the villains or get the weapon back in the allotted time. The villains need to protect the nuclear weapon for the entire time or catch the heroes. Teams and opponents will be determined by drawing lots. So let's get started. As they each drew lots, they were quickly divided into teams of 2. Izuku was paired with Uraraka while Kaken had been paired together with Ida. Once the teams were set, All Might drew the first teams to compete. As fate would have it, he and Kaken were in the first set. It was just the opportunity Bakugo needed. Izuku and Uraraka were slated to play the heroes while Bakugo and Ida were the villains. Bakugo glowered at him. Izuku could practically feel the tension permeating between them. If they remained like this, without an ounce of teamwork, he and Uraraka would easily be able to defeat them. And if possible, he wouldn't have to use his quirk at all, especially since he didn't have complete control over it yet. Kaken and Ida headed into the building to prepare while he and Uraraka waited outside for time to begin. He gazed up at the building looming above him. It was the first time would be able to stand on somewhat equal footing with Kaken. He had always been at Kaken's mercy. But this time things would be different. This time he would have Kaken surrender. This time he would be the victor. When he came flying around the corner, Bakugo had expected to catch the nerd completely off guard. And if his swing hadn't been so wide, his attack might have connected. But Deku dove out of the way, pushing Uraraka out of the line of fire. His explosion had barely singed the boy's lame green jumpsuit. Waving his large grenade-like gauntlet, Bakugo dispersed of the smoke and dust. He glowered down at Deku who stood to face him. Come on, Deku, he growled. Don't dodge. I knew you'd come after me first. Bakugo rushed him again. I won't do so much damage that the fight will be stopped, but I'm gonna get close. He swung with his right arm. Deku didn't run. Instead, he charged closer and grabbed hold of Bakugo's arm. Pivoting, he used Bakugo's momentum and twisted, slamming him into the ground. The blow knocked the wind from his lungs. Bakugo coughed, trying to catch his breath. It was like he had read his movements. Since when did Deku become so competent in a fight? You always start with a big right swing, Deku muttered. You don't think I've just been idly watching you, do you? I wrote analysis for all the heroes I thought were amazing in my notebook. In the notebook you blew up and threw away. Don't you dare start thinking I'll just let you use me as a punching bag. He was shouting now, a wild look in his green eyes. I'm gonna beat you. Grinding his teeth, Bakugo glowered at him. With a burst of small explosions, he launched himself at Deku. He kicked with all his strength, his explosions adding extra momentum. Deku raised his arms defensively, blocking his roundhouse to the face. Bakugo barely noticed the girl dart off down the hall. He didn't care if the round-faced girl got away. All he cared about was beating the shit out of Deku. Something flashed in Deku's hands, the white's captured tape he had been given at the beginning of the exercise. The fucking nerd was trying to capture him? He swung with his right, explosions shattering part of the wall as his fist connected. Deku had managed to dodge, slipping out from under him. The nerd's reactions were faster than he anticipated. But before he could attack again, Deku darted off, disappearing around the corner. "Don't run, fucker." He shot after him, his explosions propelling him forward. "You damn nerd." Though his words were as harsh as ever, something in the back of his mind nagged at him. This wasn't the same boy he had bullied all through school. There was something defiant and dangerous in his eyes. He could sense there was something different in him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. After the accident, something had snapped inside Deku. His meek and submissive demeanor had been replaced by a false smile. Where did his newfound confidence come from? He was just a pebble. How the hell did he get into UA's hero program? As he chased down the boy, he relived the moments that had defined their tumultuous relationship. Just what the hell had happened to Deku to make him act like he was superior? As he skidded around the corner, something shot out under his feet, kicking his legs out from under him. Deku swung, Bakugo barely avoiding his punch. Bakugo snatched him by the arm and twisted hard, forcing the boy to the floor. The capture tape was still in Deku's hand. Slamming his hand down, he pinned his opponent to the floor, Deku's jumpsuit sizzling beneath Bakugo's hand. "You must have some kind of latent quirk, huh? How else would you have passed the test?" he shouted. "So use it, you damn nerd." "Why won't you use it?" Deku smirked. His defiance only amplified Bakugo's anger. "Are you saying you can win even if you don't use it? Are you underestimating me, Deku?" Frustrated, Kakin? Deku mocked him. "What's wrong? Afraid someone useless like me might actually win?" There was something in his eyes that made Bakugo shudder. They looked different, a tinge of red swirling in the depths of his evergreens. There was something wild in them. It was enraging and terrifying. It reminded him of the way Deku had looked at him after he had jumped from the roof, blaming him. Guilt clawed at his insides. He scrambled off of Deku and pulled back the handle of his right gauntlet, revealing a grenade pin. "It's not my fault. It wasn't my fault." His thoughts were running rampant. "Don't look at me like that." He wanted to blow the feelings away, disintegrate them with his quirk. All Might's voice boomed through the building. "Young Bakugo, stop. Are you trying to kill him?" He wasn't thinking straight. He just wanted these feelings to disappear. But as he started to pull the pin, Deku charged forward. He grabbed Bakugo's arm and twisted it upward. It forced the pin free. And a huge explosion shot from his gauntlets. It burst through the ceiling, making the floors above them crumble. Shouting crackled through the earpiece. A smirk spread across Deku's face as All Might's voice shouted through the speakers once more. "Hero team wins." "What?" Bakugo shouted. "I had it planned from the beginning, Kakin. I knew you'd come after me and wouldn't pay attention to Uraraka-san. After she left, she found the weapon and told me its location. It was just a matter of luring you to the right spot and forcing your hand." His grin spread. The smug look on his face made Bakugo bristle. How does it feel to be beaten by someone who didn't even have to use a quirk? He predicted it. His mind was racing, unable to accept what had just happened. He predicted my every move and figured out how to win the exercise, without a quirk. Had Deku been holding back all this time? Even without any special talents, if he had managed to win this training exercise, would the outcome have been the same if they had fought all out? It was like his entire worldview was spiraling out of control. His grasp on reality was slipping around him. Someone who was quirkless was able to beat him, someone with an incredibly strong ability. It shouldn't be possible. And yet, the pride he had built up over the years, swelled up to the point of bursting, was beginning to crack. All at the hands of someone he had deemed as less than worthless. "That was amazing, Deku-kun," Uraraka said as they returned from the test. "Deku?" Izuku said, surprised. A look of confusion crossed Uraraka's face. "That's what Bakugo called you, right?" Izuku averted his gaze. "Well, my real name's Izuku, but Deku is what Kakin always called me to make fun of me," he said, trying to explain the mix-up in his name. "An insult?" Ida said. He was returning as well and overheard them. That's very unheroic of him. Oh, I'm sorry. Uraraka apologized quickly. I didn't know. But you know, Deku sounds like the Japanese for you can do it, so I kind of like it. It's okay. You can call me Deku if you want. He blushed, slightly embarrassed. He had never properly talked to a girl like this. Midoriya-kun? Ida said, shocked. You're accepting that too easily. Wasn't it an insult? I've gotten pretty used to it, Izuku admitted. It doesn't bother me that much. Besides, I like the new meaning she gave it. Uraraka grinned. That aside, your plan worked perfectly. You were right, Bakugo-kun didn't even pay any attention to me and I could slip past with no problems. I've known him a long time, so I knew he'd set his sights on me instead. I have to admit, your strategy was well thought out and skillfully executed, Ida said bitterly. I wish our teamwork had gone better, like you and Uraraka-kun. We might have stood a fighting chance. Izuku laughed. Thanks. And your quirk is pretty amazing too. Uraraka bounced on the balls of her feet as she spoke. You have amazing strength, like All Might. He merely smiled. He had been very careful not to use his real quirk in front of his classmates. All they had seen was his enhanced strength and had assumed that was his quirk. It felt nice to talk to others his age like this. It was like having actual friends. But he couldn't afford to get close to others. He had already set the ball in motions, and if he got attached to them now, it would be too difficult to execute Sensei's plans when the time came. He would have to create a distance between them. But he had to do it in a way that wasn't obvious. The last thing he needed was for them to become suspicious. It was vexing, humiliating, unthinkable. The quirkless nobody. He had beaten him, in front of the entire class. And what was worse, was he had played him. The bastard with the glasses and the round-faced girl had apparently seen Deku's quirk during the entrance exam. But quirks were supposed to manifest by the age of 4. There were no documented instances of a late-blooming quirk. Just how did Deku manage it? From the way those two losers talked about it, it had to be crazy strong. He had beaten up the villain designed to be an obstacle, which was downright ridiculous. Bakugo couldn't wrap his mind around it. He couldn't figure out what had triggered in Deku after the accident to change him so drastically. As he was heading home, the sun sinking lower, he trudged toward the school gates. The shadows cast by the setting sun stretched across the ground. But as Katsuki was walking, he noticed something strange about the shadow. There was an odd shape at the top of the building. Almost like a person. He turned around, squinting against the sunlight. Gazing up at the enormous school building, he could just barely make out the figure of someone standing on the roof. Memories of Deku jumping from the roof of their middle school flashed through his mind. Before he had time to think, he shot off toward the school. He threw open the doors and raced up the stairs. Using his explosions, he boosted his speed. The doors to the rooftop should be locked, so who could be up there? What? He slammed open the roof access door, the metal clanging loudly as it hit the side of the building. Ghosted against the sunlight was a familiar silhouette, short with a mess of green hair. His fingers were curled around the cold metal of the high chain-link fence. Deku turned slowly, glancing over his shoulder at the intruder. For a moment, Bakugo could have sworn one of Deku's eyes looked red. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It must have been a trick of the light. They were green like always. What the hell are you doing up here? Bakugo asked. Deku turned away from him, staring out at the school grounds below them. He stalked closer. Snatching Deku's shoulder, he spun him around. I asked what you were doing here, he shouted. Why? Deku frowned. Afraid I'm going to jump? Deku shook Bakugo's hand off. Having a sudden change of heart, Kakin? What the hell is wrong with you? Bakugo shouted, shoving him against the fence. Just what happened to make you change like this? You really don't know? Deku shouted back. You haven't changed at all. Ever since we were kids you've been the best, thinking of no one but yourself. Did you ever stop to think that the things you say could actually affect someone? The anger and pain reflected in Deku's eyes made Bakugo hesitate. It felt like his throat was closing up. He didn't mean for it to happen. He didn't want Deku to do it. And though he tried to suppress those feelings, The more he thought about it, he knew Deku was right. It was his fault. Don't look at me like that. You damn nerd. Like what? Deku shoved him back. Why do you hate me so much? Why are you so cruel? What the hell did I ever do to you? This isn't how he wanted things to happen. Why was it turning into an argument? All he wanted was to make sure Deku didn't jump again, to know he was okay. Why was it that every time he was with the nerd, things turned out this way? Their relationship had been strained ever since elementary school. He had been the one trailing behind him, chasing after him. Since when had they become like this, like enemies? Why couldn't he say what was really on his mind? Deku shouldered past him, trudging toward the stairs. Have it your way, Kakin. He slammed the door behind him, leaving Bakugo alone on the roof. Damn it. Why couldn't he say it? Why was it so hard? I'm sorry. It felt like he was burning up from the inside. He clutched at his t-shirt, fingers curling into the fabric. He felt hot. Izuku stumbled into his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Sensei had said it would take time for his body to adjust to his new quirk, that it would take time to learn how to control it. But he didn't think it would be like this. It felt like his body was on fire. He leaned against the desk, chest heaving. There was a sharp sting in his left eye. He winced, covering it with his hand. He hurried to the full-length mirror that hung on the side of his armoire. But what he saw staring back at him, it wasn't him. He hesitantly reached out, his fingers touching the cold surface of the mirror. His left eye was red. The usually green iris was a shade of deep crimson. What's happening? The burning intensified. Black flames leaped from his hand, licking his fingers. Sparks caught one of his old hero notebooks on fire. Frantically, Izuku tossed it on the ground and stamped on it, trying to put it out before the fire alarm sounded. He cursed under his breath as the fire finally went out. Izuku! His mother knocked on the door. Is everything all right in there? I thought I heard something. Yeah, I'm fine. He hurried to the door, holding it shut. He couldn't let her see him like this. I just dropped one of my textbooks. That's all. Okay. She sounded hesitant. Dinner will be ready soon. I'll be there in a minute. He listened for her footsteps to fade before heaving a sigh of relief. He had to get a grip on his newfound power. He couldn't afford to let his quirk activate on its own. He had to get it under control, quick. Shigaraki looked up from his drink when Izuku opened the door. The bar, which was in the basement of an abandoned building, was just as desolate as ever. As usual, Kurogyari and Shigaraki were the only ones there. Izuku hadn't been back to the villain's base since Sensei had first offered his help. After getting into UA, the villains had requested information on All Might and his schedule with the students. He had come to deliver his syllabus. He sat down at the bar, an empty stool between him and the pale-haired boy. He slid the paper's syllabus across the countertop. As promised, Izuku said. Taking the paper from him, Tamura glanced over the contents. All Might really became a teacher, huh? He teaches hero basic training. And he'll be at the rescue training next week, Shigaraki muttered. A week to prepare. That should be enough time, Kurogyari said. We have enough people waiting for their opportunity. I've been wondering, what is your end goal? I want to kill All Might, Shigaraki grumbled. We all have our separate reasons, but we, the outcasts of society, can all agree that All Might has stood in our way for far too long. He is a source of suppression, Kurogyari said. Kill him? Izuku asked. But why? He saves people. Have you ever wondered what happened to the people that man didn't save? The hate mirrored in Shigaraki's eyes sent a chill through Izuku's body. The animosity dripped from his words like poison. Where was this hero when you needed him? You know he's not a natural-born hero, right? Sensei told me his quirk is something he got from someone else. So what does that make him? A fake. He's nothing but a hypocrite, saying he will save everyone. Scum like him deserve to rot. All Might was quirkless? Someone as strong and brave as him wasn't born with a quirk? The words were an icy sting. He remembered what All Might had told him that day on the rooftop. He had told Izuku that he couldn't be a hero without power. He should give up that dream, be something else, like a policeman. Izuku didn't want to kill anyone, but hearing Shigaraki's justification, he could see why the man craved it so desperately. All Might was a fake. He had been idolizing a liar. He would cast aside those dreamer's eyes and worshipful thoughts. He didn't want to kill All Might, but he would help them defeat him. He had agreed to it. He won't be easy to take down, Izuku said. He's the strongest hero after all. We have ways to ensure our success, Kurojairi responded. All thanks to Sensei's experiments. The tone in Shigaraki's voice made him shudder. If that's the case, you'll have to be very careful, Izuku said. UA has always had tight security, but with All Might on staff, things have gotten tighter. The media are always hanging around the front gates. If you use them as a diversion to slip someone in to hijack the transmission system, you should be able to go unnoticed. If you have someone who can jam transmission signals and turn off the intruder sensors, it would be possible to isolate All Might and the rest of the class so that they can't call for backup. You've really thought this out, Kurojairi said. Izuku shook his head. I agreed to join you. It's like a game of chess. You need to think several moves ahead if you want to win. Midoriya-kun, Kurojairi said cautiously. Will you be joining the raid? No. It was one of my conditions. I don't want to be involved in large fights. Besides, we can't afford to blow my cover. He folded his arms, leaning against the rough bar top. I've been thinking. I probably shouldn't use my real name when I'm with you guys. I need an alias, like the way pros have hero names. Then what should we call you? Shigaraki asked, glancing sideways at him. The more he thought about it, there only seemed to be one name that came to mind. Kaken had always used it as an insult, but he would not see it that way anymore. Kaken had always meant it to mean useless, but he would change that meaning. Deku, he finally said. Today was the day. Aizawa-sensei had informed them of their rescue training. The class was scheduled to be held with Aizawa, 13, and All Might in a location off campus. Before they departed, Aizawa had sent them to change into more suitable attire. Most chose to wear their costumes, while Izuku wore the blue pea uniform. After his fight with Kaken, it had gotten a bit worse for wear, and thought it would be better to wear something else. While they were changing, Kirishima noticed the large scar on his right arm. Hey, Midoriya. He glanced up as he folded his clothes neatly and placed them in his locker. I've been wondering, the red-headed boy said. What happened to your arm? I was in an accident in middle school. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kaken stiffen. He knew Bakugo was afraid people would think it was his fault he had tried to commit suicide. Izuku had resolved not to tell anyone the details. He wasn't sure if it was out of consideration to not mar his name, or whether he just wanted to hang it over Kaken's head for a while longer. He smiled, trying to act as though it were no big deal. I fell off the roof and was rushed to the hospital. The scar is from when I broke my arm. You fell from the roof? And you got away with just a broken arm? It was a bit more severe than that. But it's okay, I'm all better now. Damn, Kirishima muttered. You've had it rough, huh? Izuku glanced over his shoulder at Kaken. More than others. Bakugo slammed his locker closed and stormed outside. They were taking a bus to the training location and had limited time to get ready. The rest hurriedly pulled on their gear and rushed out to join the others. It didn't take long for them to arrive. The others spent the time joking and talking about each other's quirks, wondering what the rescue training would be like. Izuku sat leaning against the window, his chin resting in his palm. He wondered if Shigaraki had gathered enough villains to follow through with the plan he had come up with. Though he was aiding them, Izuku had insisted that they refrain from hurting his fellow classmates. They had nothing to do with the villains' grudges or their vendetta against All Might. He had spent the last few days rechecking the surveillance systems. A few days prior, momentarily shut down UA's transmission to the front gates, effectively cutting off security for a few brief moments. The media who had been camping out at the gates for weeks seized the opportunity to flood the grounds, hoping to get the scoop on All Might as a teacher. If everything went according to plan, one of Shigaraki's underlings should have used that chaos as a cover to hijack the transmission system. All that was left was to wait and see if it all went according to plan. As they drew closer, a large domed building came into view. The bus turned a corner and parked in front of the oddly shaped structure. As they unloaded, 13 was waiting for them. She was wearing her signature costume, looking like an astronaut ready to launch into space. She was known as the Space Hero, specializing in rescue efforts. 13 led them inside the enormous domed building. Inside were different landscapes, all focused on different types of disasters. Izuku glanced around. He didn't see All Might anywhere. Perhaps he was running late? The syllabus definitely said he would be attending, and Aizawa-sensei had confirmed it before they left. He had no way to contact the villains to inform them of the sudden change. He just hoped it wouldn't hinder the plan. This is the training ground I made with different types of accidents and disasters. A shipwreck, landslide, fire, windstorm, and many others. It's called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. The class was filled with excitement, itching to get started. Before we get going, 13 said, let me say a few things. I'm sure you are all aware of my quirk, Black Hole. Though I am able to use it to rescue others, it can easily kill someone as well. I'm sure some of you have quirks like that, right? In a superhuman society, personal quirks have been certified and stringently regulated, so it doesn't seem to be a problem at first glance. However, please do not forget that there are many quirks that can easily kill with the wrong step. In this class, you shall learn how to use your quirks to save people's lives. You do not have powers so you can harm others. I hope you leave here with the understanding that you have powers in order to help others. Izuku glanced around anxiously. It should be any minute now. Just as Aizawa-sensei was about to split them into groups, the electricity flickered. Aizawa and 13 tensed. His classmates looked around, confused. They're here, Izuku thought. Down below, in front of the massive fountain, Kurogiri's dark vortex swirled into view. The portal expanded wider than he thought was possible. Even from this distance, he could see Shigaraki step through, disembodied hands clasped to his limbs and his face. A horde of villains came crawling out of the vortex. Izuku never knew just how many villains Shigaraki and Sensei had working for him. But he now realized it was more than he could have ever imagined. 13. Aizawa commanded, his tone drastically different than his usual indifference. Take the students and evacuate. Try calling the school. They must have someone who can interfere with the sensors and our communications. He turned to one of the students. Kaminari, you try contacting the school with your quirk? Yes, sir. Aizawa leaped down, charging into the crowd without hesitation. 13 herded the students together and started for the exit. But while Aizawa was distracted with the huge number of villains, Kurogiri managed to slip past him. He opened another portal just before the exit, blocking their escape route. I won't let you escape, Kurogiri said, his immaterial body stretching high above them. It's nice to meet you. We are the League of Villains. It may be presumptuous of us, but we have invited ourselves in order for All Might, the symbol of peace, take his last breath. I believe All Might should have been here. Has there been some kind of change? His yellow eyes flicked toward Izuku. The others didn't seem to have noticed the slight movement. Well, that is neither here nor there, Kurogiri continued. This is the part 1M to play. Before 13 could act, Bakugo and Kirishima launched at Kurogiri. They struck without hesitation. Bakugo's explosion filled the space with smoke. And as it began to disperse, they saw that the villain was unharmed. Kurogiri clicked his tongue. Oh dear, that was very dangerous, he said. That's right. Even if you are just students, you are excellent golden eggs. My job is to scatter you all and torture you to death. That had better be just talk. Izuku hadn't signed up for that. They weren't supposed to harm any of his classmates. No one was supposed to be killed. Kurogiri's warp gate spread swiftly, engulfing them all. He knew Kurogiri was trying to make him look like just another student caught up in the chaos, but he was going overboard. The portal spat him out over the water in the shipwreck zone. He landed with a loud splash and he sunk beneath the water. He kicked hard, swimming back to the surface. Azui and Mineta were thrown into water with him. As he climbed aboard the lone ship, slowly being surrounded by villains, he turned his attention back to the fight in the center of USJ. Aizawa-sensei would be tough to defeat, but if they stuck to the plan. Bakugo was screaming as he shot explosions one after another. That freaky fog villain had warped him and the dumb-haired guy to the collapse zone. They had been dropped in the middle of a rundown building, the windows broken and pipes hanging from the exposed rafters above them. The loud red-haired boy was stronger than he had anticipated. But to be honest, he hadn't been paying much attention to his other classmates. They were just side characters to him anyway. As soon as they dropped from the weird vortex, small fry villains came crawling out of the woodwork. They attacked them mercilessly, but Bakugo wasn't some useless kid. Die! He shouted, explosions shooting the small fries back. Kirishima fought hand-to-hand, his quirk allowing him to harden his body like metal. It didn't take long for the two of them to dispatch the dumbass villains who tried to fight them. They were left with nothing more than a scrape or two. This all of them? Bakugo scoffed. They're so weak. Alright, let's hurry up and go save the others. Kirishima said. If we're here, then everyone else should be inside USJ too. I'm worried about the guys with less offensive abilities. Besides, because we ran off ahead, we slowed 13 down. If 13 had been able to suck up that fog, then this wouldn't have happened. Bakugo arched an eyebrow. The dumb-haired guy sure was self-righteous. As me, we have to take responsibility for what we did. If you want to go, then go by yourself, Bakugo said. I'm gonna kill that warp gate? What? You're gonna act childish at a time like this? Kirishima shook his head. Besides, that guy's attacks are... Shut up. Kirishima balked slightly but held his ground. That gate bastard is the enemy's way in and out. I'm gonna cut off their getaway route for when the time comes. It's not like we don't have a way to fight that fog bastard. He sensed a bloodthirsty presence behind him, but it didn't seem powerful. There was a bit of hazy movement, like seeing through heat rising from a bonfire. He snatched hold of it, the invisibility surrounding the villain wavering for a moment. Bakugo's palm popped as he lit up the villain with explosions. He was finally visible, like some kind of weird chameleon. Anyway, he said, lifting the now unconscious villain. If these small fry are the ones assigned to us, pretty much everyone will be fine, right? That reaction time was amazing, Kirishima muttered. Were you always so calm and rational? I thought you were more like, loud and impulsive. I'm always calm and rational, you spiky-haired punk, he shouted angrily. He laughed. Yeah, that's it. More like that. Bakugo tossed the unconscious villain aside. Go if you want. Wait. Kirishima grinned. Believing in our friends, that's really manly, Bakugo. I'll follow you. It didn't take them long to find their way out of the collapse zone. There was such a loud uproar coming from the edge of the water where the shipwreck zone started. It was easy to figure out where the boss was. It sounded like Aizawa Sensei was still fighting. As they raced toward the commotion, that's when Bakugo noticed something strange. True, their classmates had been separated to different areas of USJ, but he spotted Deku. Alone. Watching the fight. Despite the danger, there was a look of childlike excitement glimmering in his eyes. He followed Deku's gaze. All Might. All Might was there, fighting some weird humanoid thing with a bulging, exposed brain. He was half engulfed in the warp bastard's black fog. And he was bleeding. One of his classmates shouted something, distracting Kurogiri. Bakugo launched forward, seizing the opening. He had noticed something before when he had attacked him at the beginning. There was a glint of metal hiding within the swirling fog, just below his glowing yellow eyes. He snatched the villain by the silver collar. He slammed the fog to the ground, his grip firm on the metal. Take that. Ice suddenly shot forward, freezing the weird creature's leg all the way up to his arm. The ice halted the monster's movements, allowing All Might to break free. Bakugo frowned, glaring over at Todoroki. The half-and-half bastard's presence annoyed him. He had that high-and-mighty attitude, like he was better than everyone else. It was irritating. Kirishima leaped out behind him, striking at the weirdo with the hands all over his body. But his reactions were too fast. He jumped back before the freak could counterattack. Damn it! Kirishima shouted. I didn't get to show off at all. The warp villain struggled under Bakugo's grip. Stop acting so stuck up, foggy nobody. They all turned to the lanky young man. He didn't seem all that menacing, But Bakugo could sense something darker from him. The freak scratched his neck to the point that it started to bleed. He was muttering to himself, saying something about their exit being blocked. "You careless bastard," Bakugo scoffed. "You're just what I thought you'd be. Only certain parts of you can turn into a misty warp gate. That fog gate covers your real body, right? Back then you said that was dangerous? If you were completely made of mist, and physical attacks couldn't touch you, then you wouldn't have said that." The villain struggled again, but Bakugo fired warning blasts against his metal collar. "Don't move. If I feel like you're moving suspiciously, then I'll blow you up." "Your behavior isn't very hero-like," Kirishima said jokingly. With a brief word, the pale-haired bastard commanded the weird creature. It moved so fast, Bakugo didn't have time to react. It rushed toward him. He didn't even see it coming. A strong hand grabbed him and yanked him out of the way. The next thing he knew, All Might was fighting the beast head-to-head. The fight that unfolded was one he had never expected to see. He had never seen All Might fight with such amazing power, with brute strength so strong the beast didn't have time to regenerate. It was almost terrifying. But it wasn't the villains or the beast that concerned Bakugo. It was the look he had seen in Deku's eyes before he rushed in to help. It was a look of excitement, not for his idol, but for the violence that was unfolding before him. It was like he wanted this to happen, like he had expected it. The plan had gone south very quickly. The majority of the lower-class villains Shigaraki had brought with him had been captured red-handed. And the Numu they had brought to fight All Might had been defeated. But just barely. The teachers arrived shortly afterward to provide backup, and the League of Villains had wisely retreated. But Deku was livid. He had specifically told them not to harm the students, but they had deliberately ignored his request. He threw open the door to the musty old bar. He didn't care that Shigaraki had been injured, shot by snipe. He snatched the man by the collar of his black shirt. "I told you to leave my classmates alone. Your target was All Might," he shouted, his eyes glowing red as his quirk simmered just below the surface. "Deku, please calm down," Kurogiri said. "Those brats were stronger than I expected," Shigaraki grumbled. "They got in my way and had to be dealt with. And All Might, he was healthy." He turned his attention to the TV in the corner. "You were wrong, Sensei." "No, I wasn't." Sensei's voice drifted from the television. "We were just not prepared enough, even with young Deku's brilliant plan. Yes, we underestimated them. It's good that we did it under that cheap League of Villains name." Deku released Shigaraki roughly. "What about that thing? The Numu?" "Yes. He was a fine experiment. We made him as strong as All Might." "But how?" Deku persisted. "You remember that serum we gave you?" Sensei said. Deku froze. "That's how you made him?" "With much higher doses, of course." Sensei laughed. "I merely gave you a much lower dose, to assist your recovery and strength. I would not dare damage such a brilliant mind. It would be a waste." "You mean I could have ended up like that thing?" No. Of course not. I have high hopes for you, Deku. You and Tamura both. I would not dare ruin something like that." He could hear Sensei sigh. "It is regrettable, the outcome. But it was not a futile exercise. Gather the elite and take all the time you need. We cannot move freely, which is why we need a symbol like the two of you. Next time, show the world that you are both to be feared." When Izuku returned home, his mother threw her arms around him the moment he walked through the door. Tears rolled down her plump cheeks. "Izuku, my baby. I was so scared when they called and told me what happened." She took his face in her hands. "You weren't hurt, were you?" "No. I'm fine." He smiled. "I'm sorry I worried you." She heaved a sigh of relief. "I've been so worried since started school. I'm afraid that something might happen to you. You've been acting strangely and frankly I'm concerned." "There's nothing to worry about. Honest." She tilted her head, scrutinizing him. "Honey, are you sure you're not hurt? Your right eye is awfully red." He quickly covered his eye and laughed hesitantly, forcing a smile. "Well, it was pretty intense. I'm sure it's nothing." "Are you sure?" He hurried past her, heading for his bedroom. "I'll have the nurse at school look at it tomorrow. Recovery girl can heal anything." He shut himself in his room, locking the door behind him. That was a close one. He couldn't let his mother find out about his quirk or where he had been sneaking off to after school. She couldn't be involved. He may have voluntarily joined the League of Villains, but he wasn't about to let her be dragged into it. He would protect his mother from the dark world he had chosen, no matter what it takes. Everything was happening too quickly. The school semester just seemed to fly by. It felt like just after the League of Villains had attacked Class 1A at USJ, the sports festival was just around the corner. Unable to make their move, Deku lay low as the villains regrouped. The sports festival flew by in a blur. But it was not entirely fruitless. Deku found another student who, like him, had been shunned by society. Shinso Hitoshi. His whole life, the people around him had seen his quirk, mind control, as something evil. Surely it was a quirk only suited for villains. But determined to become a hero, he had enrolled in UA and been accepted into the general studies course. Deku had faced him in the third round of the festival, in a one-on-one fight. It had been thrilling to find someone just like him. Perhaps he could persuade him to join him? His quirk would be incredibly valuable to the others. Sensei would think so too. To be able to control someone's mind just by talking to them, it was enviable. After their fight, Deku waited for him in the backstage corridor. Just thinking about their fight gave him chills. When Shinso had activated his brainwashing quirk, it had felt like his head was full of fog. He was vaguely aware of what was happening, but couldn't control his body. It acted according to Shinso's commands. When Shinso rounded the corner, Deku stepped forward. "That's an amazing quirk you have," he said with a smile. Shinso looked away. It must have felt humiliating to be beaten, and to him it probably seemed like Deku was pitying him. "I was wondering. Why do you want to be a hero, Shinso-kun? You can't help the things you long for," he muttered. "I don't need any other reasons." The answer sent a chill through Deku. He had felt the same way before he had taken that fateful leap from the roof. It was what he longed for more than anything. He understood exactly how Shinso felt, which was all the more reason to persuade him to join them. Shinso didn't seem to want to talk about it, but Izuku walked alongside him anyway. "Everyone is wary of you because of your quirk, right? Doesn't that get lonely? What are you getting at? Our classmates don't understand how hard it is for people like us, who have been shunned for things that aren't our fault. How could you possibly know how I feel? You're part of the hero course." He shouldered past Deku. "I was bullied." Shinso froze. "I was put down, told I could never be a hero. It was my dream. I wanted it more than anything in this world. But no one believed in told me it was impossible. It felt like I was drowning." Deku looked up at the hero hopeful. "Isn't it suffocating being around people like that? Wouldn't it be better to be with people who appreciate your talents instead of hanging around those who are afraid of you?" Shinso frowned, a glimmer of curiosity in his dark eyes. But before he could speak, Kaken came storming around the corner. His fight with Uraraka was coming up and he was headed for his respective waiting room. When he spotted Deku he hesitated. "What the hell are you doing here?" he grumbled. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me," Deku said, turning his back on them. "Deku?" He didn't wait. He walked down the hallway and disappeared around the corner. Bakugo snatched Shinso by the shoulder. "Droopy eyes. What did he say to you?" Shinso brushed his hand aside. "Nothing," he mumbled. Shoving his hands in his pockets, the boy trudged down the hall, opposite the direction Deku had disappeared. Bakugo ground his teeth. One of the things he hated most was being ignored. Deku was avoiding him, giving the cold shoulder. And now even the journal studies side character was avoiding him. Tiny explosions snapped and popped in his palms as his temper flared. He would find out what was going on with Deku. There was something not right and he was determined to figure out what it was. Deku had planned to throw the match with Todoroki. He enjoyed the attention he was receiving, but he was supposed to be laying low. He had progressed through the sports festival without using the quirk Sensei had given him. But when Todoroki started moaning and complaining about his own powerful quirk, something inside Deku snapped. It infuriated him, Someone born with something so powerful was complaining about it. Instead of throwing the match, he fought his classmate with everything that he had. "It's your power, isn't it?" he shouted at the top of his voice. "You were born lucky." He got carried away. As he charged at Todoroki, screaming in rage, he felt the flames of his new quirk burning beneath the surface. His vision turned red as he swung wildly. But through his fury, he fought to suppress the dangerous quirk he had been granted. Walls of cement erupted between them and the rest of the match was a hazy blur. Due to Todoroki's simultaneous use of his ice and fire, the rapid drop in temperature in the air was suddenly heated and expanded. The resulting explosion had thrown Deku from the ring. He remembered pain exploding through his head as he hit the wall of the arena. The rest was darkness. There was nothing, just darkness. But as it slowly began to recede, he could hear voices. They were talking in hushed tones. Though their voices were low, it felt like they were screaming in his head. It felt like his head was going to explode. "It just doesn't feel right." It was All Might's deep voice. "He's acting strange. When I first met him he was full of hope and light, but now—" "I understand your concern," Recovery Girl said. "But I cannot determine those things with my quirk. I can only heal physical injuries. Psychological and emotional are beyond my control." He was hurt badly during the match. "Is he all right now?" Recovery Girl sighed. "The blow to his head caused a lot of swelling, but because he was treated quickly enough I was able to prevent any damage." "I see." There was hesitation in All Might's voice. "Would it be all right if I wait here so I might speak with him? I can't stop you. But give him time to rest. When he wakes up he will probably still be in a lot of pain." That blow to his head was a nasty one. He tried to ignore the sound of All Might pulling up a chair beside his bed. He wished he could go back to sleep or at least pretend he hadn't heard them. But his curiosity got the better of him. Blinking slowly, he turned to look beside him. All Might was sitting at his bedside, all puffed up in his muscled glory. In the past he would have been beside himself with excitement, giddy that he was so close to his idol. But now, knowing he was sham, it only filled him with anger. "Ah, young Midoriya, you're awake," he said with a grin. He winced, the hero's voice sounding twice as loud as it really was. Deku turned away from him. "I'm sorry, I should have realized sooner." Deku glanced at the hero, All Might's head hanging slightly. "I had forgotten what I told you that day on the rooftop. When class began, I didn't realize who you were. You are completely different from the young man I met that day." Izuku averted his gaze. "Forgive me for telling you that you couldn't become a hero. Clearly I was wrong." He didn't answer. "I'm sure you are still frustrated from the results of your match and you don't feel like talking. I understand. But young Midoriya, I must know, where did you get your quirk?" "I must just be a late bloomer," he muttered. "Please, this is serious. I must know. Did someone give it to you?" Izuku stared at him a long time, trying to decide if he should tell him the truth. He wasn't in too deep yet. He could still change his mind and tell the pros about Sensei's plans and the League of Villains' whereabouts. He could rely on the heroes, the people he had looked up to and admired for so many years. He felt his chest tighten. It was his last chance. "No," he finally said. There was no turning back now. All Might nodded slowly. Izuku couldn't tell if the number one hero believed him or not, but he didn't seem to want to question him further. He stood. "All right, rest up, young man. There is still time." He turned away from the hero, listening as he closed the door and his footsteps faded down the hallway. His shoulders trembled and he covered his mouth, trying to hold his voice in. Tears welled up in his eyes, streaming down his freckled cheeks. He choked on a silent sob, not wanting his voice to be heard. All Might was wrong. There was no time left, not for him. He sat alone in his bedroom. The glow from his computer screen illuminated his face in the dark room. The news feeds were primarily about UA's sports festival and the winners. Though everyone was included in the news coverage, the highlights mentioning a few students by name, Bakugo and Todoroki, were the primary focus. Kaken had placed top among the first years. He had won against Todoroki, but he had not taken the win well. Todoroki had only used half of his powers, just ice. and Kakin had been furious, wanting to beat him when he was at full power. As a result, his pictures were not very flattering. He was literally chained the winner's podium, an odd type of muzzle strapped over his mouth so he couldn't scream profanities. Izuku snickered. The sight of Kakin being restrained in such a demeaning way brought him a small piece of satisfaction. As he waded through the flood of media coverage, he scoured the other news stories. He read through some of the minor incidents that heroes had taken care of across the city. But there was one story that caught his attention. There were reports springing up across the country of heroes being attacked, even killed. Most of them were lesser-known heroes, all making their way to fame. But someone was singling them out and taking them down one after the other. The media was calling this assassin the hero killer. Izuku clicked on another link, reading the article with curiosity. The League of Villains were trying to overthrow the hero system and expose their corruption. Someone like the hero killer could be of use to them. Maybe he would even want to join with them. A picture in another of the articles caught his attention. It was a blurry photograph taken by a security camera on one of the latest crime scenes. It was the entrance of an alleyway, a dark figure retreating into the shadows. He couldn't see much of the man, but there was a hint of red, a scarf perhaps, fluttering behind him. It was the only known photograph of the hero killer. There was a soft chime from his computer. A breaking story had just surfaced. The hero Ingenium, in Hosu City, had been attacked by the hero killer. He had survived the assault and was currently in critical condition. Wasn't Ingenium the name of Ida's older brother? He clicked on the link, wanting to read more. Despite his condition, Ida Tensei Ingenium was cooperating with police. He had described the killer's face. And his attacker had even spoken to him during the confrontation, identifying himself as Stain. Hero killer Stain, he muttered. Picking up his cell phone, he dialed the number Kurogyri had given him. It was an unregistered number, making calls untraceable. Kurogyri's dark, polite voice answered on the other end. I found someone who can help Sensei with his plans, Deku said, clicking on one of the images. He's in Hosu City. See if you can find the hero killer. I think we can use him. Shortly after the sports festival, they were given an opportunity to join a hero agency as an intern. Many of his fellow classmates received requests, asking them directly to come to their agency. Deku received a few, making his choices slim. In the end, he decided to join Tokoyami to train under the Hawks, the winged hero. Being at a hero agency wasn't quite what he had expected. There was a lot of grunt work involved, lagging behind Hawk's sidekicks. But it wasn't an entirely bad experience. He learned the inner workings of the agencies and their drawbacks. It wasn't until Kurogyri sent him a summons, asking him to meet back at the base, that things started to get interesting. After finishing their training with Hawks for the evening, Deku slipped away. Drawing the hood of his sweatshirt up over his head, he carefully made his way to the part of town where the seedy old bar lay hidden. When he arrived, Shigaraki and Kurogyri were already waiting for him. You weren't followed? Shigaraki asked. I could have warped you here if you were a bit closer. It's fine, Deku said, lowering his hood. No one followed me. So, what was so urgent that you called me back? I have finally found that man you wished for us to recruit. Kurogyri handed him a newspaper. The headlines were all about the hero killer that had been running rampant lately. He should be here shortly. Not long after Deku arrived, Kurogyri's warp gate opened up. The assassin, with wild black hair and dressed in dark clothes, his arms covered in bandages, stepped out. His heavy steel-toed boots had spikes on them, adding to his threatening appearance. He wore a tattered red scarf and a bandage-like mask over his eyes. Numerous daggers were strapped to his body and a sword on his back. Deku could feel the dark bloodlust emanating from him. It sent a chill straight through him. You are the ones who wanted to talk to me, huh? He grumbled. I'm a busy man. What do you want? Mr. Stain, Kurogyri began. We will cut straight to the point. We would like you to join the League of Villains. For what purpose? To kill All Might, Shigaraki cut in. In a flash, Stain lunged, dagger flashing. He sliced Kurogyri's arm before knocking Shigaraki to the ground. Deku leaped out of the way, barely dodging the tip of the blade as the assassin swiped at him. Before Shigaraki could react, Stain drew another dagger and lodged it deep in the man's shoulder. He licked the blood off his knives. Kurogyari froze instantly, unable to move. "So, you want to add me to your numbers?" he scoffed, leaning over Shigaraki. "No matter what you want to accomplish, it is necessary to have conviction and desire. Those without it and those who are weak will be weeded out. It's only natural. That's why it turns out like this." "Oh, that's too rough," Shigaraki muttered. "Kurogyari, take this guy back. I can't move my body. It must be his quirk." This warped society covered with hypocrisy and vanity, to all who are called heroes, I will make them take notice. In this society overgrown with fake heroes, where the world itself has lost its true meaning, and the criminals who wave their power around idly should all be purged. "I agree," Deku said, stepping forward. "That's why I asked Kurogyari to bring you here." Stain scowled up at him, his red eyes gleaming. "And who are you?" "You're just a child. My name's Deku. I've been wronged by this society of fake heroes, just like the others here. We wish to change the way this world works, revolutionize it. Isn't that what you're doing? You're only attacking heroes who join the profession for the money or the fame, not the ones who genuinely want to help people. That's what we want, to stand up for the outcasts and downtrodden." You're different from this one," he said, gesturing to Shigaraki. "You have conviction. Criminals without should just be purged." As he inched one of his daggers closer to Shigaraki's neck, the edge nearly touching the hand that always rested over his face, Shigaraki snatched the blade. "Hold it." "Not that hand," he grumbled. His eyes gleamed dangerously behind the fingers that hid his face. The metal dagger began to crumble under Shigaraki's fingers. "I'll kill you." Stain hesitated. "You sure talk a lot," Shigaraki said, a wicked grin spreading across his cracked lips. "Conviction? You're right. I don't have anything grand like that, not like Deku. If I had to say, yeah, it'd be all might. I feel like I really want to completely crush this society where trash like that gets worshipped." Something in Shigaraki's expression sent a chill through Stain. As his dagger turned completely to dust, he leaped back, just before Shigaraki could touch him. He held his dagger defensively, ready for an attack. Shigaraki straightened up, covering the knife wound in his shoulder. "My last injury was finally about to finish healing, and we don't have a healer in our party, you know." Shigaraki started scratching his neck. It was neurotic tick he possessed. He was unable to control himself. "Will you take responsibility for it?" "So that's the kind of man you are," Stain muttered. "We don't quite see eye to eye," Deku said. "But I can assure you, our goals are the same, yours and mine. We want to change this world. Our goals may somewhat align," he said, glancing at Deku. "But my ideals oppose his." He nodded to Shigaraki. "However, we can both agree on one thing, to destroy the present." Shigaraki staggered forward. "Stop messing around. Go home." "I'm the kind of person you hate most, right? I was testing your true motives." Stain slid his dagger into its sheath. "People show their true colors when they are on the verge of death. It's different, but there is desire, a warped sprout of conviction living inside you. How will you bud? It might not be too late for me to wait until after I've seen that to dispose of you." "You're gonna dispose of me?" Shigaraki glanced at his comrade. "Kurogyari, I don't want someone this crazy as a party member." "Don't be so rash," Deku said. "He would be a great asset if he joins us." "Stain-sen, won't you reconsider?" He muttered. "You may look like a child, but I can tell you've seen darkness, like this one. Your ideals are strong. Perhaps, if our paths cross again, we might be able to negotiate. But not with your partner as he is. My business here is done. Now, return me to Hosu." He licked his lips, eyes gleaming dangerously. "There are still things there I must attend to." Kurogyari's warp gate appeared before the door and Stain stepped through the vortex. Once he was gone, Deku breathed a sigh of relief. He hadn't even realized he was holding his breath. The atmosphere in the bar had turned hostile quite quickly after he arrived. Though the hero killer had not agreed to join them, there was still a way to use him, if he played his cards right. Shigaraki may be the figurehead so to speak, but Deku was the brains. He came up with the plans and Shigaraki executed them. That was the deal. And if things went according to plan, they might be able to double their numbers. All thanks to Stain. He hadn't expected Shigaraki to overreact. Deku had thought his eccentric partner could be rational, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Not tonight. Shortly after he had left the bar, Kurogyari and Shigaraki followed Stain back to Hosu. Wanting some fresh air, Deku had decided to walk back to the dorm where Hawk's hero agency was housing him and Tokoyami. But he didn't get very far. In the distance was a loud explosion. He turned to see a plume of smoke rising above the tall buildings, the glow of fire illuminating the dark sky. Deku turned on his heel and ran toward the commotion. He hoped it wasn't what he thought it was, but he knew better than to hope. Shigaraki had probably lost his temper. As he neared the epicenter of the chaos, he spotted 3 Nomu running amok in the city. Despite the neon signs glimmered brightly, the plume of black smoke and bright glare of the fires blotted them out. Shigaraki was certainly making a statement, but he was endangering innocent lives. He was acting out, like a spoiled child. As he was racing toward the commotion, that's when he remembered that Ida had taken an internship in Hosu City. And though he had not admitted it, Deku knew it was so he could find the hero killer and take revenge for his brother. Ida was smart. After seeing the chaos, he would have figured out it wasn't Stain's doing. The hero killer was probably taking advantage of the situation, completing his business in the shadows. And knowing the class rep, he was probably searching for him. He quickly turned. Using his boosted physical abilities, thanks to Sensei's drug, the race through the city. It enhanced his muscles, allowing him to run faster than he ever could in middle school. He searched every back alley he could. Even though he had joined the League of Villains, he didn't want any unnecessary deaths, especially his classmates. A glimpse of movement caught his attention. A dark man wearing a scarf the color of blood, looming over another man in white armor. He darted toward them, swinging as hard as he could. He felt his fist connect, a solid hit to Stain's jaw. The punch knocked him away from his classmate, lying helpless on the ground. "Me, Midoriyukuin?" Ida said in disbelief. Deku cursed under his breath. He hadn't come prepared for this. He wasn't wearing his hero costume, he had come in jeans and a green hoodie. The only part of his hero costume he had was the metal mask he used to cover his nose and mouth. Deku wasn't even a hero. He was technically a villain. But he stood his ground. He would not allow unnecessary death. How did you find me? They talked about it on TV. 60% of the hero killer's victims were found in places without many people. That's why I searched away from the center of commotion in the alleyways near your internship agency. He glanced over his shoulder. He had to get Ida out of here. If they lingered, it would lead to an extended fight and Stain might blow his cover. Can you move? We need to get to a bigger street so the pros can help. I can't move my body. Ever since he cut me, I think it's his quirk. A twisted grin spread across Stain's masked face. Midoriyukuin, Ida said. Don't get involved. It has nothing to do with you. Coming to save a friend? Stain asked. Stand aside, boy. I have a duty to kill him. If we clash, of course, the weaker will be called. His words and the look in his murderous eyes sent a cold chill down Deku's spine. They were the eyes of a hardened killer. He had felt it when they met at the bar. Despite their earlier meeting, the hero killer was obviously not going to be lenient. It didn't matter now if he had conviction or not, or if their ideals aligned. They were enemies if Deku stood in his way. So, what will you do? Stain asked, his sword glinting in the light. Midoriyukuin, run. Ida shouted at him. I told you it's none of your concern. Deku rushed forward with a boost of speed. As Stain's sword swung toward him, his left hand quickly unsheathed a dagger. But Deku was too quick. He ducked, sliding under the slim opening between Stain's legs. He kicked off the ground, leaping over the villain and swung. The blow hit him hard. But despite the solid punch, Stain merely stumbled slightly. Are you stalling? Stain said, regaining his footing. Why do you stand in my way? I don't want unnecessary bloodshed. People who haven't had time to grow, to properly choose their path, I won't allow you to kill them. You have clashing ideals, boy. That weakness will get you killed. In a flash, Stain was upon him. Deku barely managed to dodge his sword, ducking below a second dagger as the killer swung with his other arm. Stain was right. He couldn't hope to survive this fight, not if he had resolved to fight empty-handed. He glimpsed the murderer lick his knife. A strange feeling jolted through him, making his limbs freeze in place. That must be how his quirk worked. He had to ingest the blood. But when did Stain cut him? He hadn't even felt it. You are an enigma, kid. People who are all talk are worth a dime a dozen. But you would be worth sparing. You're different from these guys. Stain stalked toward Ida, the tip of his crooked sword inches from the class rep's face. Stop! Deku shouted. What happened to letting them bud? Don't kill someone who hasn't had the chance to grow. Stain lifted his blade to strike. Deku could feel the heat of his black flames swirling just below the surface, begging to be released. He didn't want it to rampage. But if he didn't act, Ida would die. Stop it! Stain raised his blade to strike. Deku's vision turned red. He screamed in rage and frustration, his control on his quirk slipping. Black flames exploded outward, shooting across the killer's path. Stain leaped back, narrowly avoiding them. Still immobilized, Deku stood there, glaring at the murderer standing before him. His chest was heaving, anger seething within him. He had never felt so angry before. It was like his quirk was fueling it, adding to the blaze's strength. The paralysis only lasted a few minutes longer before Deku regained mobility. Midoriya-kun. What's happening? From his position, Ida couldn't quite see him. All he had seen were the sudden flames. That's right. He had to be careful. If he wasn't, Deku could blow his cover. Discreetly, Deku pulled out his smartphone. Holding it behind his back, he quickly sent a mass message to his contacts, including only his location. He would stand his ground, feign his need for assistance. If one student was able to take down the hero killer, that would be quite suspicious. He couldn't afford that. He glimpsed some broken glass near the dumpster. Taking a step forward, he pulled his hand inside his sweatshirt sleeve and picked up the largest shard he could find. Stain was right. He couldn't fight empty-handed. He gripped the glass tightly. The fabric of his hoodie did little to protect his hand from the sharp, jagged edges. Deku rushed forward, slashing with his weapon. Stain was taken aback by his sudden burst of speed. He had felt it once before, when he had fought Kaken during their training exercise, exhilaration. Facing a strong opponent head-on, wanting to fight them, he was burning with excitement. He kicked Stain in the chest as hard as he could. The killer stumbled. Deku drove the shard of glass into the man's leg, embedding it deep. He could feel it slicing through muscle. It gave him chills. Slowly a grin spread across the boy's face, his eyes glowing red in the moonlight. His quirk was consuming him. He hardly felt the pain of the glass cutting into his hand. After the physical agony he had endured at the end of middle school, it was nothing. Besides, thanks to Sensei's drug, it would heal soon enough. Stain drew his dagger, plunging it into Deku's shoulder. But before he could pull it out and lick Midoriya's blood, Deku leaped back, dagger still buried deep. As Stain advanced, a plume of bright fire shot from the back of the alley, forcing the hero killer back. The sight of the flames shocked Deku, wrenching him free from his quirk's hold. The crimson in his irises melted back to green. Turned. Todoroki stood there, phone in hand, his left side engulfed in his own flames. Had he seen the black flames? Had he given himself away? Stain scowled, annoyed that he was being interrupted yet again. Midoriya. You need to give more details in times like these, Todoroki said. You made me late. Todoroki-kun, you too? Ida said, shocked. Why are you here? Deku was just as surprised. He hadn't expected Todoroki to show up. His father's agency wasn't even in Hosu City. Though neither was Hawks, and yet here he was, trying to save Ida. But that should be my line. It took me a minute to figure out what your message meant since you sent just your location info. You're not really one to send that for no reason. You meant that you were in a pinch and calling for help, right? Ice shot from his foot, creating a barrier between the hero killer and his victims. Todoroki rushed forward, simultaneously shooting fire from his left hand. Don't worry. The pros will also get here in a few minutes. While Todoroki distracted Stain with his ice and fire, Midoriya launched himself forward. Stain sidestepped him, elbowing him hard in the jaw. Deku gritted his teeth against the pain radiating from his shoulder. He had left the dagger, knowing that if he pulled it out now it would increase the rate of blood loss. But now it was becoming a nuisance. "Get back, Midoriya." He leaped back just as spikes of ice shot toward them. Midoriya stayed just out of reach of either of them. His reactions are too fast. "He's able to avoid both my ice and fire," Todoroki said. "Midoriya, our best option is to avoid close combat and hold on until the pros get here." He hated to admit it, but Todoroki was right. Deku nodded. "I'll keep him distracted, so you support me from behind." "That's a pretty big risk, but you're right." 2 against 1, Stain muttered. "It won't be easy." Deku darted forward with his enhanced speed. He slashed at Stain. His sleeve was already stained red, blood running down his arm from the wound in his shoulder. Ice shot forward from the opposite side, blocking the hero killer into the alley. But as the fight dragged on, the more erratic Stain's movements became. Like Deku before him, he was being consumed by the lust for battle. He was a string opponent. Though he was faced with 2 opponents, he was able to avoid the majority of their attacks. He sliced through Todoroki's ice with ease and dodged his fire. Deku's quick movements kept him on the ropes. Seizing a small opening, Stain charged toward Todoroki, his sword arcing up to slice him in 2. A blur of white shot forward and with a clang snapped the blade in 2. Recipro burst. The engines in his legs firing at full blast, Ida kicked the villain again, knocking him away. "You're free?" Todoroki said, relieved. "Todoroki-kun, Midoriya-kun, this has nothing to do with you, and I apologize for getting you involved. That's why I can't allow you two to bleed more than this." "It's no use trying to be reformed for appearance's sake," Stain said darkly. "A person's essence does not change easily. You will never be anything but a fake who prioritizes his own selfish desires. You are a cancer to society that warps the idea of heroes. And I will be the one to set you straight. You're an anachronistic fundamentalist," Todoroki said. "Ida, don't listen to the logic of a murder." Now that he was fighting 3, something in Stain's movements changed. He was becoming desperate. He was trying to accomplish his task before the pros arrived, all while fighting off 3 powerful hero students. Stain's way of fighting was to get in close, cut his victim and immobilize them by ingesting their blood. But with them all fighting defensively, he didn't have the opportunity to use his quirk to stop them. With the 3 of them working together, they could do it. Ida launched forward, boosted by the engines in his legs. At the same time, Deku kicked off with his enhanced speed. They were too fast for the killer. Ida kicked him hard in the side just as Midoriya's fist struck him in the jaw. In the brief second when they were both out of reach, Todoroki's flames shot skyward, engulfing Stain. The murderer hit the ground hard. The 3 of them stood defensively, waiting for the next attack, but it never came. Stain was unconscious. "Let's restrain him and get out to the street," Todoroki said. "Is there anything to tie him up with?" "Just in case, we should take all his weapons off him," Deku agreed. Ida managed to find some rope in the dumpster nearby and the 3 of them restrained him. Stain had more weapons on him than Midoriya had imagined, an obscene amount. As Todoroki and Ida checked the hero Stain had originally attacked, Deku quietly backed away. One hand on the wall of the building, he crept toward the back of the alley, seeking to disappear into the shadows. "Midoriya-kun, you were hurt pretty badly," Ida said, standing up. "Let's take a look at your arm." But when Ida turned to where his classmate had been, Deku was gone. "Midoriya?" Todoroki glanced around. "Hey, Midoriya." All that was left was a streak of blood smeared across the wall. His classmates shouted his name urgently, but Deku remained hidden. He couldn't afford to let the pros find him at the epicenter of the fight. Ida was alive and that was good enough for him. For now it would be best to disappear into the shadows before the heroes arrived. With all the commotion and the arrival of the pros, it would be difficult for Deku to slip away. He had managed to evade detection thus far, but he couldn't risk moving around too openly. He lurked in the shadows, just out of sight. He watched as they dragged Stain out onto the main street. It seemed like that would be the end of things when one of Shigaraki's Nomu swooped down from the sky. The creature screeched loudly, snatching up one of the fleeing civilians. Deku could see the blood running down the side of the Nomu's face. It had been injured badly and was fleeing. But just before it could escape with its victim, Stain launched forward, unfettered by his restraints. The Nomu froze, crashing to the ground. The woman it had grabbed shrieked in terror as they landed hard. This society overgrown with fake heroes, and the criminals who wave their power around idly should all be purged. This is all to create a more just society. Stain plunged his dagger into the Nomu's exposed brain. He twisted and yanked hard, killing the creature instantly. The woman cowered in terror, afraid she would be the next victim of the hero killer. But he did not attack her. Just as Endeavor came running around the corner, chasing the Nomu, something inside Stain snapped. Deku pulled out his smartphone and turned on the camera. He zoomed in on Stain. Even if the hero killer was captured, if he was able to record his firm ideals, his lust for justice, his loss might not be in vain. The pros seemed frozen, overwhelmed by the killer's presence. It sent chills coursing through Deku. Endeavor, Stain growled. He turned slowly. You fake, I must make things right? Even from a distance, Deku could tell he was suffering from his injuries. The ragged mask slipped from his face, revealing his crazed red eyes. He stalked forward, despite the pain. Someone must be dyed in blood. I must take back what it means to be a hero. Come, try and get me, you fakes? Even Endeavor seemed intimidated by the conviction and overwhelming presence the murderer exuded. The only one I'll let kill me is the true hero, All Might. The pros stood frozen. And only when the bloody knife slipped from Stain's hand did they move. Stain, though still standing, had lost consciousness. As the heroes apprehended him, restraining him carefully, Deku withdrew. He played the video back, rewatching what he had just recorded. Though Stain had been captured, he would be able to make good use of his ideals. They needed a strong spokesperson to draw others to them. Shigaraki certainly wasn't cut out for it, but Stain might be just the person they were looking for. He saved the video before calling the unregistered number Kurogyri had provided for him. He was losing too much blood, making him feel lightheaded. And he didn't want to risk being seen. Kurogyri, he said after the man picked up. Can you warp me back? I don't feel so good. A black vortex opened up behind him. Deku stumbled through it, collapsing in exhaustion on the other side, not bothering to see where he had been transported. When he opened his eyes again, he realized he was back in the dorm room Hawk's agency had provided for him. He groaned. All he wanted to do was lie there and sleep, let his body recover. But he couldn't risk someone finding him there, covered in blood. He pushed himself up, sharp pain lancing through his shoulder. He yanked Stain's dagger free. Without the knife embedded in his shoulder, blood flowed freely from the wound. Deku pressed his hand firmly against it, hoping he could stop the blood flow before it got worse. Tearing off one of the sleeves of his sweatshirt into makeshift bandages, he wrapped the wound tightly. He quickly locked the door before dragging himself to the bed. He felt drained, exhausted. But before he could relax, he had to get rid of the evidence. Taking off his bloody clothes and the dagger, dumped them in the metal trash can by the bed. Using his quirk, he lit the mound ablaze. He watched as the black flames consumed the clothes and knife, burning them until they were nothing but ash. Ida and Todoroki were probably still looking for him. Maybe even the pros had gotten involved. He had to come up with a good alibi if anyone came asking questions. But as his mind was reeling, trying to think of excuses, his consciousness began to fade. Soon he drifted off into a deep sleep. Midoriya. Tokoyami's voice startled him awake. His eyes snapped open to see his classmates staring down at him. He glanced at the door. It was open. He could have sworn he had locked it before falling asleep. How did you get in here? He asked nervously. The door was locked, so Dark Shadow reached under the door and opened it from the inside. The shadowy bird-like partner that was part of Tokoyami appeared behind his shoulder. His yellow eyes gleamed out from his dark form. Midoriya, are you okay? Tokoyami asked, his brows furrowed. I'm fine, he muttered, sitting up. Is something wrong? Ida called me, he said, holding up his phone. He said you were in Hosu and helped him out of a tight spot. He said you were hurt pretty bad and disappeared. So I came to check on you. He cursed himself inwardly. He should have known Ida would contact Tokoyami. The class rep was very observant and probably knew the two of them had taken internships at the same agency. He should have been more careful. Well, What were you doing in Hosu? Were you involved in the League of Villains incident? Hosu was the next town over. If he could just come up with a convincing lie. Hawks said he sometimes goes to Hosu on business, so I was curious what the other agencies were like, the ones he partners with. I went to check them out after training, but I got caught up in that mess. He smiled innocently, hoping Tokoyami would buy his lie. But judging by his classmates' frown, it wasn't working. You didn't tell Hawks? Or any of the sidekicks? I wanted to check it out on my own. I didn't know all that would happen. What about what Ida said? He said you were hurt. Are you all right? I'm fine, he snapped, his composure slipping. Ida-kun is probably exaggerating. I left quickly so I would be able to catch the last train back here. I didn't want anyone to worry. Really? Deku nodded. You should talk to Hawks and let him know. Don't tell Hawks. Tokoyami seemed taken aback by Deku's sudden change. Deku cleared his throat, trying not to sound as desperate as he felt. Please don't tell him. It was my mistake and it won't happen again. Just trust me, okay? Tokoyami seemed to consider his request a moment before he finally answered. Fine. But if it happens again, I won't keep quiet. Thank you. Deku quickly closed the door behind his classmate. His grip tightened around the cold doorknob. This was bad. Very bad. He could tell Tokoyami was suspicious, and there were 3 witnesses who had seen him in Hosu, Ida, Todoroki, and Stain's original target, the hero native. It wouldn't take long for them to unravel his lie. Time was ticking. He couldn't live his life this way for much longer. There were already too many cracks in his mask. Just as he had feared, his presence during the incident and sudden disappearance hadn't gone unnoticed. One of the other pros who had rushed to the scene to apprehend Stain had phoned Hawk's agency and questioned him about his intern's whereabouts. It didn't take long for people to start asking questions. He dodged the questions as best he could, but he could feel the distrust lingering with each answer he gave them. He knew they didn't quite believe him. It was starting to fall apart. With the way things were going, he would be forced to withdraw from his school life. And though it was the last thing he wanted, he was starting to face the reality that he would have to leave his comfortable life at home, cut himself off completely. Thankfully, the internship would only last a few more days. When he finally did return home, his mother questioned him about what had happened. Hawks and the school had called her to inform her that her son had been involved in a dangerous incident. And, of course, she had been worried sick. It took longer than usual to calm her, assure her that everything was all right. But when he did finally get away from her probing, he felt drained. Locking himself in his bedroom, he transferred the video footage he had shot from his phone to his laptop. He couldn't let something this valuable go to waste. He cut and pasted clips from the news as well as the video he had recorded, and edited them together to make a compelling video. Perhaps it would reach enough people like him to draw them to the League of Villains. They could always use more allies. The video exposed Stain in a different light than how the media had painted him. It portrayed him as a type of fallen hero, seeking to set the hero system back on a correct path. Deku's video focused on his idealism and his goals. He made sure to emphasize that most of those out there calling themselves heroes were fakes, and that society's need for change was the reason behind the killer's purges. He made sure to include Stain's rage-fueled speech before his capture. Even through the screen, you could almost feel his ironclad resolve. Once he had finished editing, he uploaded the video anonymously. All that was left was to wait and observe the fruits of his labors. He turned off the data tracking on his laptop and secured his browser on incognito mode to avoid any curious eyes. Deku plugged in his headphones. He pulled up a video chat, calling Sensei. It didn't take long for him to answer, but with only the audio. What is it, Izuku? It had been a long time since he had heard Sensei's deep voice. I think I'm in trouble, he admitted. I slipped up. People are starting to get suspicious. The time has come then. Are you prepared to follow through in your promise? Yes. Though he didn't want to leave his home behind, this was the path he had chosen. There was no way for him to turn back. He was in too deep. I have not changed my mind. You'll keep up your end of the deal, right? You have my word. None of my men will bring harm to your mother. She will not be touched by anyone on our side. Deku heaved a sigh of relief. We might be able to make it seem my disappearance unintentional, if we do things carefully. You have a plan? I do. But it will take a little time. Do as you see fit, my boy. I have nothing but time. He could almost hear him chuckle on the other end. I look forward to seeing you again, Deku. The video had been taken down several times, but each time Deku re-uploaded it under a new anonymous account. It was drawing a lot of attention. To the media, it was seen rather negatively, but for Deku and his comrades it gave them the traction they needed. Lower-level criminals trickled in, one by one, seeking to join them. Through the video and news coverage, they had mistakenly thought that Stain had been part of the League of Villains. But that was just what he wanted them to believe. They didn't need to completely align their ideology with theirs, as long as it was enough to make them usable. Shigaraki, however, wasn't taking things as well. Though he was older, he acted more like a child than Deku did. His comrade was annoyed that everyone was talking about Stain and not the Nomu attack. He had wanted to make a statement, appear in the spotlight, and he hated that Stain was receiving it instead. But Kurogyari sided with Deku, convincing him that though their involvement was secondary, it had been a necessary boost. Over the next few weeks, more and more low-level criminals crawled out of the woodwork seeking to join. There were some, however, who were a far cry from the small fry they had been seeing. Sometimes Jiren would bring better prospects into the bar, just as he had done with Deku that night. And Deku made sure he was present whenever such valuable assets were brought in. It was one of those nights when Jiren arrived, delivering two of their greatest assets yet. The bell jingled as the middle-aged man entered the bar. He held a cigarette in his hand, smiling that same gap-toothed grin. Shigaraki-san, Deku-san, you all have been the talk of the town for the past few days. I hear you're starting something big. And? Shigaraki cut him off. For? Jiren chuckled. He disappeared momentarily before returning with two people. The first was tall man with spiky black hair. His skin was covered in patchwork scars, like he had been burned in several places and pieced back together. He stared at the three of them with icy blue eyes. The other was a girl about Deku's age with dangerous yellow eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled up into two messy buns. She wore a school uniform Deku didn't recognize. So it's you, huh? The man said. I saw a picture of you, but you look gross in person. And someone else. He turned his cold eyes to Deku. Didn't see you on the news before. I've been keeping a low profile, he said. Wow, the hand guy. The girl giggled with excitement. You all are friends with Stain-sama, right? Right? Let me join too. I want to be part of the League of Villains. Deku was more than ready to accept them, but Shigaraki was positively seething. Kurogyari, he growled. Get rid of these guys. Everything I hate came together in one set. A brat and a rude guy. Now, Kurogyari said, trying to calm Shigaraki's anger. They came all this way to visit, so let's at least hear them out. Besides, that big shot broker brought them. They're bound to be valuable assets, just like Deku. Jiren took a long draft on his cigarette. I don't care what you do with them, but make sure I get my commission, Kurogyari. But at least let me introduce them. He stepped forward. First, this cute high school girl. Her name and face were kept tightly under wraps by the media, but she's on the run as the suspect in a series of deaths by blood loss. I'm Toga. Toga Himiko, she said excitedly. It's hard to live the way I want. So I want the world to become an easier place live. I want to become Stain-sama. I want to kill Stain-sama. So let me join the League of Villains. I don't get her, Shigaraki muttered. Is she crazy? Don't be rude, Deku snapped. She can hold a conversation for the most part. I'm sure she'll be of use, Jiren said. Next, this guy over here. He hasn't committed any flashy crimes, but he holds fast to the hero killer's ideology. I'm not so sure about this, the man said. He glanced at Jiren. Does this organization really have a just cause? Don't tell me you're going to let this crazy woman in? Hey, you can't even do what that crazy high school girl was able to do, Shigaraki snapped. Give your name first. You're an adult, right? I currently go by Dabi, the man said. Shigaraki was growing more annoyed by the second. That's not what I want to know. What's your real name? I'll tell you when it's time. But I will carry out the will of the hero killer. You don't have to say what you haven't been asked, Shigaraki grumbled. We don't need real names, Deku said, stepping forward. As long as they have names and a desire to join us, that's good enough. And who are you? Dabi asked. I'm Deku. He smiled innocently. I'm the one who uploaded the video about Stain. I've been pulling some string in the shadows, so my presence in the League of Villains hasn't been made public yet, which is why you haven't seen me on TV. Weren't you one of the kids involved in the USJ incident? Dabi said. You're right, Toga said, excitement brimming in her voice. I think I saw you briefly on the news when the League of Villains attacked UA. I'm currently a student at UA, he admitted. But I'm undercover at the moment. Who cares? Shigaraki grumbled. He stood up, a dangerous glint in his eyes. They're only here because of Stain. I don't like it. You mustn't, Shigaraki, Kurogyari warned. A chill coursed through Deku at the look in Shigaraki's eyes. The two newcomers must have felt it too. Shigaraki lunged at them. Quick as a flash, the two lashed out. Toga's dagger glinted in her hand and embers glowed in Dabi's palm, the three of them seeking to land the first blow. But Kurogyari intercepted them all, his warp gate appearing before them in the blink of an eye. He diverted each of their attacks, preventing them from harming each other. You need to calm down, Deku said, glowing at his partner. Just because you don't like them, doesn't mean they're useless. If our desires are to be realized, then we need to increase our numbers. Now that we're in the spotlight, this is our chance. He is right, Kurogyari interjected. His mist-like body stretched toward Shigaraki and he whispered, we must use what we can, all of it, the ideology Stain left behind. Shut up. Shigaraki stormed past them, slamming the door behind himself. Deku sighed. I'm sorry for his rudeness. But we would be glad to have you. Dabi stared down at him, the slightest bit of curiosity glimmering in his pale eyes. Your friend makes me sick. You seem a lot different than him. He grinned. Thank you. Here's to working together. We have big plans. Toga rocked on her heels, unable to contain her excitement. What's first? What's first? We have special plans that you might be able to help us with, but I'll have to fill you in later. For now, why don't we get to know each other a little better? Dabi smirked. You've got tenacity, kid. I like that. Hopefully you'll come to appreciate more than just my tenacity. He could sense the unease surrounding him. There was a distinct air of suspicion and mistrust. He had screwed up during the internship, but there was no use beating himself up over it. Deku was determined to power through with his studies, keep his head down, and avoid further wariness. All he had to do was make it through his midterms and then he could focus on his escape plan. They had to tread carefully to avoid suspicion. But being paired up with Kaken for the practical midterms, it was the worst possible outcome. They had to work together to either escape or capture their assigned villain. And the teacher who had been assigned to them was All Might, which was even worse. Not only had he been paired with the one classmate who definitely could never work together with, but they had been pitted against the one hero he couldn't fight. There was no way the two of them could fight All Might head-on. Deku had insisted that they strategize in order to escape. But Kaken's pride would not let them. He wanted to fight. He hungered for it. He refused to turn his tail and run away. But trying to talk Bakugo out of it was pointless. Stubborn. Prideful. Anger. Kaken was striving to be the #1 hero, to surpass All Might. But he embodied everything a hero was not. It was almost amusing. He was more like an anti-hero. If anything, someone would even think he was a villain. Kaken had made it clear in their struggled attempts to clear the exam. Seizing a moment of hesitation in All Might's merciless attacks, seized Kaken and darted off down one of the side alleys in the mock city. Kaken struggled against him, furious that Deku had rescued him. Bastard, put me down. Kaken shouted as Deku carried him far away from All Might. "Shut up. I said put me down." He elbowed Deku hard in the back of the head. Deku dropped him. He let himself rest for a moment, leaning against the wall as he tried to catch his breath. Bakugo struggled to his feet. All Might had not held back, not in the slightest. Deku's mind was reeling, trying to figure out a way he could pass the exam. All that mattered was passing. He needed to pass to follow through with the next stages of his plan. "Kaken, I really can't think of a way to beat All Might or a way to make a clean escape, especially if you're going to act like this." "Huh." Bakugo glared at him. "Be rational for once. We have to work together if we want to pass. Don't let your stupid pride get in the way." He must have hit a nerve. Bakugo rounded on him, a shout of anger and frustration escaping him. He swung wildly, hitting the wall just inches from Deku's face, his explosion sending up a plume of dark smoke. "Shut up, damn nerd. I don't need your help." Deku snatched him by the front of his hero costume. His eyes flashed red, his anger boiling just beneath the surface. "No, you shut up," Deku shouted. "For once in your life, listen to what I'm saying. We can't beat him. If we strategize and use your max power carefully, we can make a break for the escape gate. But you have to work with me." "Shut up, bastard. I'll kill you." It seemed like the moment the words left his mouth, Bakugo realized what he had said. He had tried not to talk that way after Deku's accident. The guilt had been too much. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but he felt responsible for Deku's dive off the roof. "Kill me?" Deku released him roughly. "Are you finally showing your true colors, Kaken? You want me dead?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" The look in Deku's eyes gave him shivers. His eyes were cold and red. "You've been telling me that for years. Do you know how many times you've said you'd kill me? Or how many times you told me I was so worthless I should kill myself? Because I do." "Deku, your eyes." "Shut up and pay attention," he screamed. "We're going to pass this exam, and in order to do that we have to work together. So get over yourself and listen." Bakugo backed down slightly, though Deku could still see the annoyance in his eyes. All Might won't budge with half-assed power. "I figured that out earlier with those consecutive hits," Kaken said. "So, we give him everything we've got at point-blank range. How do you expect to do that?" Bakugo unclasped his left gauntlet and handed it over. "A lot of power has been stored up in there. When I give the signal, pull this pin. The blast should be strong enough to create an opening." When they finally set up their plan, they began to put it into motion. All Might was running around looking for them, so he wouldn't be hard to find. Kaken leapt out first as a decoy. It gave Deku just the chance they needed. As he pulled the pin on Kaken's gauntlet, he let a bit of his flames leak out into the explosion. He could tell by the look on his partner's face that the size of the resulting explosion was not what he had anticipated. The two made a mad dash for the escape gate. But All Might recovered quicker than they had anticipated. They had nearly made it when he came out of nowhere. He was upon them in a matter of seconds. All Might smashed Kaken's gauntlets, stripping them of their max power attacks. His punches hit harder than Deku could have ever imagined. It knocked the wind clean from his lungs. Kaken leapt back into action, swinging wildly. He created a huge explosion. But without the support of his gauntlets, he sent shooting pain through his arms. It was tearing through muscles. He was overexerting his power. In the moment of confusion, Deku seized his opportunity. He made a mad dash for the gate. Kaken refused to run, and Deku would not hesitate to leave him behind. All that mattered was passing the exam. All Might tried to catch him, but surprisingly, Kaken managed to hold him off just long enough for Deku to stumble through the gate. Bakugo kept fighting down to the last second. He would not give in. He would fight to the end even if it killed him. Kaken's pride was too strong to allow him to admit defeat, ask for help, or run away. It would be his downfall. And though they had managed to clear the exam, the lingering feelings festered within Deku, the feelings that had been burning for years. He had been striving to keep up with Kaken, to be his equal. But now all he felt was envy and hate, fueling the dark fires that burned within him. Deku sat alone in his bedroom, arms resting on his desk as he stared at the computer. The screen illuminated his face, the only light in the dark room. He was rewatching the same old video, the one that had filled him with ambition and hope all those years ago. The sound of blaring sirens and the crackle of flames could be heard over the frantic yells in the video. Can you see that? He's already saved 100 people, the terrified bystander said. The camera shook as someone held it aloft, trying to get a better shot of the disaster. That's crazy. It hasn't even been 10 minutes. It's insane. Rising above the wreckage was All Might, laughing confidently. Izuku's heart felt constricted as he watched All Might emerge from the wreckage. What had once made him feel exhilarated now only filled him with longing. All Might's voice could be heard over the chaos and crackling flames, people in his arms and draped over his shoulders. It's fine now, he said loudly. But because I am here. Tears brimmed in Izuku's green eyes. He stood up quickly, knocking over his chair in the process. It was all lies. The hero society he had idolized, the industry he had wanted to join so desperately, was all a sham. And the one hero who wasn't in it for the fame, glory, and money had turned his back on him. The faces of his idols smiling down at him from the walls, it was like All Might was mocking him. Screaming in frustration, he tore at the posters. He ripped them from the walls, tearing the hero's face in two. He couldn't look at him. He swept the dozens of action figures off the shelves, the toys clattering as they hit the floor. Izuku! His mother's worried voice drifted in from the other side of the door. The knob jiggled as she tried to enter his room, only to find it locked. Honey, are you okay? What's all that noise? Nothing, he snapped. I'm just letting out some frustration. What's wrong? Is it about school? He hesitated. School stuff. Do you want to talk about it? No. I'll be fine. He sank to the floor, feeling helpless. He didn't want his mother to worry, but he couldn't confide in her either. He was stuck. I'm sorry I worried you. I'll try not to make so much noise. There was a moment of silence before he heard her sigh. All right. Dinner will be ready soon. Make sure you wash up and come out to eat, okay? Okay. As he heard her footsteps fade, he stared at the carnage he had created in his dark bedroom. Bits of torn posters still hung from the walls, the rest strewn across the floor. Some of his action figures had broken when he knocked them from the shelves. Many of them were worth a good bit of money. After all, his collection of All Might memorabilia was extensive. But now it was worthless. It was all just emptiness. A gnawing feeling of despair clawed at Deku. When he finally put his plan into action, he would never be able to come back here. He couldn't talk to his mother, hug her, eat the dinners she lovingly made for him. For the first time, he regretted the agreement he had made with Sensei. He was trapped. But there was no turning back. He had to leave or he would expose her to danger. There were only a few days left now. He had to make the most of it while he had the chance. Time was ticking. The day had finally come. He had left the posters and the action figures as they were, destroyed and in disarray. Deku had carefully packed his bag, making sure he didn't forget anything important. He took his hero notebooks, his cell phone, and anything else that might be of some use to him and the League. He couldn't leave behind any evidence if someone came snooping after he left. He locked his bedroom behind him, not wanting his mother to see the state of things. He didn't want her to worry, not just yet. Classes A and B of the hero course were headed into the mountains for an extensive training camp. It was during that time that he would put his plan into action. He hadn't told his mother anything, deliberately kept her in the dark. She smiled up at him. Take care of yourself, she said. I will. We'll only be gone for a week or two. Izuku, before you go, I wanted to apologize. He hesitated. What for? To be honest, I've been feeling terrible lately about something I said to you when you were younger. I think you might have felt that I gave up on you a while back. But now look at you. You persevered and kept chasing your dream like a real champion. She wiped away the tears brimming in her eyes. And after everything that's happened this past year, the guiltier I felt. I'm so sorry for what I said back then. And I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Deku swallowed past the lump forming in his throat. This might be the last time he ever spoke to his mother. It was the one thing he would regret. He pulled her close, hugging her tightly. What's wrong, sweetheart? I'm going to miss you, Mom. She returned his embrace, running her fingers through her son's messy green hair. I'm going to miss you too. It will be quiet around here without you, but I'll see you soon. He nodded. Yeah, I'll see you soon. I love you, Izuku. He swallowed hard, holding back his tears. I love you too. As he opened the front door, he glanced over his shoulder, stealing one last look at his mother's kind, smiling face. Be safe. I will. And as the door closed behind him, he felt the weight of his decision bearing down on him. It would be the last time he set foot in this house. He could never come back. The last pillar of light in his life was gone. Forever. It had been quite the ordeal getting to the camp deep in the woods. They had stopped the bus on the side of the road, overlooking the dense woods. 2 members of the hero group, the Wild Pussycats, had been waiting for them. And after thrusting them into the dense forestry to fight their way to camp, the class was left to fend for themselves. Some of his classmates fared well, like Ida, Todoroki, and Kaken. Deku tried to isolate himself from the rest of the group, not wanting to reveal his dark fire quirk to the others. But Kaken made it difficult. It was like he was watching him. He was barely able to get a few strides ahead before Kaken caught up to him. It was annoying. If Kaken was keeping this close of an eye on him, it would be hard to orchestrate his escape. By the time they arrived at camp, the sun was setting and everyone was exhausted. Though the Wild Pussycats treated them to a delicious meal and a much-needed bath in the open-aired onsen, Deku was not able to fully relax. In just a few short days, his comrades would be coming for him. They would have to tread carefully. If he played his cards right, he could make it seem like a kidnapping instead of a hero student defecting. He would just have to bear with the grueling training until the day came. They had set up a rendezvous time beforehand, but with the pros around and the sheer amount of students, it would be hard. But that's what made it interesting.